All right, great. Well, I'll go ahead and get us started off. Thanks everyone for joining. We're really excited to bring one of these other, climbing mountain debt webinars to you again. I would say it seems like we've been here before. We've actually been doing a number of webinars here in the last couple of weeks. So we're excited to kick this one off and bring some really important, helpful information. My name is Dr. Rebecca Mears. I'm from the VIN Foundation Student Debt Education team, and we're also joined by our wonderful speaker, Dr. Tony Bartels, as well as Jordan Benshia, the Executive Director of VIN Foundation. We'll all kind of be helping you out today. So if you could just go ahead and we'll use the chat for any of our technical issues, but any questions that you have throughout the presentation, go ahead and use the Q&A for those. You can find it at the bottom of your screen. You can ask questions anonymously if you'd prefer. You can also upvote those questions. That way we can see which ones are the most pressing questions, which are shared by the most people, and be able to sort of prioritize those throughout the presentation. And then we'll do some questions and answers at the end as well. So just kind of spread throughout. There will be a copy of the recording as well as some other helpful information that'll be emailed to everybody that registered for this event. So in case you missed something, don't worry, you'll get the recording. You'll also get a copy of Tony's Prezi with all of the links as well. So with that, we'll get started off here. Tony, I did want to mess you up a little bit and start you off with a question.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk a lot about consolidation tonight, but when I was looking through some of the registration questions, one of the most common questions I saw related to consolidation that I know kind of trips people up is, what happens to my interest rate if I consolidate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I saw a lot of questions about consolidation too, so we're going to cover that for sure tonight. But your interest rate, when you use a federal consolidation loan, they calculate a weighted average of all of the interest rates that go into that consolidation. So your interest rate should not change appreciably. Now, there are some instances where that can change, and we can look at when and why that is. But for the most part, your interest rate should stay about the same as it was before if you consolidate using a federal direct consolidation loan. So, but that's going to be one of the big topics that we cover tonight. This is kind of a redo, if you will, right? We did the end of the year one thinking that the consolidation deadline for the one-time count adjustment was on December 31st, but then the day after, I think it was the day after we did that webinar, the Department of Education extended that deadline to April 30th. And holy cow, we were just talking about that before we started the webinar up. I mean, April 1st is next week. So we're bearing down now on the extended deadline for the consolidation to still qualify for the one-time count adjustment if you need to consolidate for that particular benefit. I see a question that somebody asked in the Q&A as well regarding that, and Beck and I still see pretty much every day we come across veterinarians who can still benefit from consolidating their student loans to benefit from this one-time count adjustment. So in one hand, it's great that it was extended again to give you all additional time to think through that and become aware of it. But at the same time, this is probably the last extension. I know I've gotten burned on that in the past where I thought that this would be the last time that they extend something, but logistically, it would seem like this has to be the last time that you'll have the opportunity to do this. Whether or not they do something like this down the road again it remains to be seen, I guess. But if they want to get the count adjustment applied, which was another common question I saw in all of the registration questions, by the deadline that they agreed to provide it by, which is July 1st of this summer, then they have to set that deadline for consolidation around the end of the month here, because it's been taking at least 60 days to get a consolidation through, if not longer. So first, for tonight, I really want to turn it over and get to your questions as fast as possible. So I've got three main topics that I want to cover here before we do that. And that's the one-time count adjustment. So we've been kind of bantering about that. What is it? Do you need to consolidate? How do you look at your loans and decide whether or not you're good? you're set to receive the count adjustment as your loans are, or do you need to act before April 30th in order to maximize that potential benefit? So we're going to cover that first, and that's going to be a lion's share of it. And then also, one of the things that happened recently is that the recertification deadlines for those of you that are using income-driven repayment plans, that was pushed out into the future, right? So after the pandemic forbearance benefits ended last fall, the original recertification window was going to start again this month, March of 2024, but there was a lot of issues with restarting income-driven repayment recertification, and thankfully, or annoyingly, however you want to look at it, it's kind of throws wrenches in multiple parts of the repayment plan for a lot of people. The recertification deadline has been pushed out to later this summer and early fall. So we're going to talk about that too, and that brings up recertification versus switching. Some people are really confused by the two, and some people may have already switched thinking it was time for them to recertify, so they just went ahead and switched, and we can talk about what that means as well. And that's not a bad thing. It just it's just going to be, it is what it is in terms of if you switched your plan already, there's not much you can do about that to go back and get maybe a lower payment that you might have had before. Which is the best plan, right? So, and that's really kind of been the other big question that everybody's been asking is like, all right, now how do all these different benefits that are out there, one-time count adjustment, recertification deadlines, the new save repayment plan, how do I know which one I'm supposed to be in, right? So, and there's going to be a lot of overlap between choosing a repayment plan and the count adjustment and such. So those are the three big concepts you want to talk about tonight, and then I want to turn it over and just dive into the questions that you guys have based on your student loans. I've got a number of cases too that we'll use to illustrate these concepts along the way tonight. So hopefully while you're sitting there on your computer, if you haven't already kind of looked at your student loans using the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool, I'm going to encourage you to do that so you can ask those questions about your student loans while we're going through these concepts. This is a word cloud of all of the primary concerns that you guys submitted for the over 600 people that registered for this session tonight. So we can see some pretty common themes there. So consolidate, consolidation, save, the new save repayment plan, forgiveness, right? So all of these things are kind of the top concepts that are on everybody's mind when it comes to student loans right now. All right, so student loans, we can't manage what we're not measuring, right? And that's what we really have to start with is what are we looking at, right? What do these different names of these student loans mean, and how do they fit into these benefits that we're also talking about, like the one-time count adjustment? So for the most part, we really want to make sure that all or most of our loans have some kind of direct in the name, right? So you're going to have a bunch of subtypes of direct loans, right? So direct unsubsidized, direct grad plus loans, direct subsidized from undergrad, direct consolidated loans, right? So if you have direct loans in the name, you're already eligible to 100% eligible to receive the count adjustment. All direct loans are going to automatically receive that forgiveness count adjustment. The confusion comes if you still have some of these other loans, right? These federal family education loans. So if you were in higher education using federal student loans at any point around or before July 1st of 2010, then you might have the predecessor to the direct loan, which was called the federal family education loan. And these come in two different flavors. So there's a privately held version and there's a federally held version. And the federally held version will receive the one-time forgiveness count adjustment. However, the privately held version will not. Right? So we have to be able to differentiate between those two. And FFEL program loans generally aren't very beneficial anyway. Before the one-time count adjustment, you kind of had to just live with them and leave them as is. But since you have this unique opportunity, you can choose to consolidate some or all of those loans to make them eligible for some of the more beneficial repayment plans. And you'll retain all of that repayment time, forgiveness time that you already earned for those particular loans, right? So that's really the gist of this one-time forgiveness count. You can think of it as kind of a reset button on the really, really messy federal student loan repayment system, right? So instead of making sure that you have the right loan and the right repayment plan to be eligible for forgiveness, the one-time count adjustment essentially says, forget all that. We're going to go back in time, no matter what federal loan types you had, as long as you get them into the direct loan program and eligible for the count adjustment, we'll give you forgiveness credit for any repayment time that you previously had. So this is an outstanding opportunity to clean up some of the just common, let's call them messiness, mishaps, whatever, that we see with federal student loans, right? I mean, these are the common federal student loan types that Beck and I see when we're evaluating student loan portfolios for our colleagues. Not all of them are eligible for income-driven repayment plans or forgiveness, but the forgiveness count adjustment and using a consolidation loan, if you missed that opportunity to do that in the past, you have that opportunity now, at least until April 30th of this year. All right, so private loans, there's going to be anything that doesn't fall into this category, right? So if you have loans that don't look familiar there, don't have that kind of name, a descriptor in front of them that's in that federal student loan section, then they're probably a private loan, right? So Discover, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Sallie Mae, all of those types of loans fall into a private loan category. And unfortunately, none of those are eligible for any of the forgiveness programs that we're going to be talking about this evening. If you've lost chance or lost track of anything, you can certainly check your credit report, annual credit report. They're still letting you check a free credit report from the major reporting entities once a week, right? Usually it's once a year, but ever since the pandemic, they've kind of opened that up to checking it more frequently for free. So that's a good habit to get into, especially we're in tax filing season. This is a great time of year to check that credit report just to make sure there's not anything on there that you don't recognize. These are some of the other questions that you guys provided or concerns with your registrations, and I pepper these throughout the presentation too, just because they bring up interesting concepts, and I want to make sure that I don't forget to talk about tonight. But bankruptcy, that's kind of a loaded topic. If you went through a bankruptcy and had student loans, it's really going to depend on what status your federal student loans ended up in during that bankruptcy. Bankruptcy statuses, unfortunately, won't be counted towards the forgiveness count adjustment. Default status can, right? So it really depends on what status those loans move through while you may have been going through a bankruptcy on your end. So that's really going to depend. There are some other opportunities, though, if your loans are in default, called Fresh Start, that you can work through that might help you to get some additional forgiveness time as well. We're not going to talk about that a lot tonight, but if you ask those in the question, we can certainly dig a little deeper into those. But some of these other ones, it really has to do with, and this is why we've been really pushing with the emails, and maybe if you've been on VIN, you've seen some alerts that have said, hey, it looks like you might have some loan types that you need to act on before this count adjustment, because this is really something that pertains to those of you that have been in repayment for a long time. Right? We don't see that very often. You don't really see that opportunity to go back in time and benefit from something, like if I graduated in 2001, I still have student loans, what's there for me, right? In the past, there really hasn't been much available for you. And this forgiveness count adjustment has changed all of that, right? So when I see, graduation years from 1990, 95, 2000, 2001, I mean, you guys are either already at the threshold to receive forgiveness if you have the right loan types, or you're really, really close, right? So I've been paying on my loans since 2001. I have consolidated and refinanced over the years. Is there any forgiveness available? Well, that's going to depend, right? It depends on what loan types you have left. If consolidation, that's something that you can do pretty commonly in the federal student loan system. Refinancing, not so much, right? So this is one of those kind of like red flags. Like if you paid off your federal student loans with a private loan, then there's not going to be any forgiveness opportunity available for you. But if you consolidated them into another federal loan, then you do still potentially have the opportunity to receive forgiveness. In this case, most likely this person has 23 years or so of repayment time, which means they'd be about 2 years away from hitting forgiveness. Right. So those are the types of things that we're looking for. Right. I've been paying for 20 years and still have 2/3 of my principal. Exactly. Right. And this is one of the things that they're trying to fix with this one-time forgiveness count. If you've been in repayment for 20 years, if as long as you have the right loan types that will receive this forgiveness count adjustment, then you're, no more than 5 years away from being done with repayment, regardless of how much of your balance you have left. This one, this is an interesting one. I'd like to know more about it, but it certainly brings up, there can be, goofs, and there can also be, there's certainly no shortage of errors we've seen in the system, particularly in how they calculate payments. But somebody that consolidated because of the earlier deadline, maybe the end of the year 2023 deadline, and now the payment amount is twice what I was told on the save plan. Well, I want to double check that, right? We want to make sure that they calculated the payment correctly, that they're not using some, wrong type of income information for you, maybe, or maybe there's a better plan for you to use between now and when you might receive forgiveness, right? So those are things that, that's great. Maybe you got you check the box for consolidation, so you got your loans into the right type of classification to receive that count adjustment. But now we want to check the rest of the details too. Get underneath the hood, check and make sure that you're in the right repayment plan. They calculated the payment amount correctly for you, and that there might not be something better for you to use that might have a lower monthly payment until you reach forgiveness. All right, so all of this starts with a federal student aid data file, right? And I'll just walk you guys through this just to make sure that everybody's aware, right? So studentaid.gov is the place that you want to go. So we're going to log in to our studentaid.gov account. Anybody that has ever had student loans will have an account with studentaid.gov. I'm going to log in here. It's going to text me a code. Oh, there it is. Super fast. And it's going to give you all the scary language. It's going to make you constantly update your information, which is a good thing. Make sure all of your name, address, phone number, email particularly is up to date in here, because you want to make sure that you receive some correspondence from from the Department of Education or your loan servicer. So make sure that your contact information is up to date. This is my remaining student loan balance. I can see my loan servicer information in here. I don't have anything. I've got my loan servicer name. The due date is actually missing from here. This is another good piece. I've been referencing this a lot lately, this My Activity section. So when you log in, and if you submit a consolidation, there was somebody I think submitted a question about, I submitted my consolidation application at the end of last year and I'm still waiting. Right, that's pretty long. It's been taking 60 days or so, but 90 days, that's a long time, right? Now I would log in to here and I would look in this My Activity stream to see if your consolidation application is still processing. Right, same thing you'll see if you're renewing or switching an income-driven plan. You'll see that application in here, and it's a good way to access that information that you submitted to the Department of Education. But to find your student aid data file, kind of that, to do that minimum database, we need to do a good physical exam of our student loans. I'm going to click on this View Details button. So I hit this View Details button, and it pulls up a little bit more information. And I'm looking for this blue Download My Aid Data button, right? So when I click that, it's going to download this ugly looking TXT file to my desktop, and that's what I want to use to take over to the VIN Foundation, my student loans tool, to upload and see what it tells me, right? So keep that file in that ugly looking TXT format, and then we'll come back to that student aid or the My Student Loans tool in just a second. All right, so forgiveness count adjustment. What is it? So it was back in, it was almost 2 years ago now. So they announced, I think it was April of 2022. They came out and said, look, we're to try to get everybody on the same page and make this a little bit easier to manage, we're going to allow people the opportunity to have any repayment time and certain deferment and forbearance time to be counted as forgiveness eligible. So prior to that, you had to be using a forgiveness eligible plan. So income-based repayment, income contingent repayment, revised pay as you earn, the new save plans, saving on a valuable education. So those are all income driven repayment plans that have forgiveness provisions associated with them. If you were using a graduated plan, an extended plan, a standard plan, those typically weren't eligible for forgiveness consideration. But now they're going to go back in time and they're going to look at whatever your repayment history was and give you credit for at least the repayment time and certain deferment and forbearance time towards forgiveness. And the way forgiveness works for the income-driven plans is that based on the plan that you choose and the loan types that you have, you will receive student loan forgiveness after making 20 or 25 years of qualifying payments towards your student loans, right? So for most of you, that's going to be 25 years, right? So for some more newer graduates, they have access to the 20-year forgiveness option, but anybody that graduated pretty much before 2012 does not have the opportunity to have the 20-year forgiveness option on graduate school student loans. So that's what differentiates. That question comes up a lot too. Is how do I know if I get the 20-year versus the 25-year forgiveness? In most cases, particularly if you're a 1990 something grad or early 2000, mid 2000 grad, you're in the 25-year forgiveness bucket because that's pretty much the forgiveness eligibility for anyone with graduate school student loans who graduated around that time, right? So you're looking for, have I been in repayment for close to 25 years, right? And once you hit that 25-year threshold, any remaining balances you have will be forgiven, right? And we've seen that happen. We've actually seen that happen for many of our colleagues who have gotten their loans into the right type of student loan under this forgiveness count adjustment, and the rest of that balance has been forgiven already, right? So you just need to make sure that your loans are ready to receive that particular benefit. Consolidation used to be one of those things that would reset your forgiveness time, right? But this is a special exception, the one-time forgiveness count adjustment. Even if you consolidate previously consolidated loans or loans that have time towards forgiveness already, they're going to still give you that existing forgiveness credit, if not more, if you end up including some older loans in that new consolidation loan. And this is why this adjustment is so beneficial, right? You have the opportunity to, especially for those of you that might have some breaks in your borrowing, right? So I went to undergrad and then I had a couple of years before I went to veterinary school and I never consolidated my loans. If you consolidate them all together now, you'll get the forgiveness time that corresponds to the oldest loan in that consolidation, right? So the one that has the highest amount of repayment time, right? So that's what we're looking for. And forgiveness time is extremely valuable, right? If you can shave 2, 5, 10, 15 years off of repayment, right? You think about how much you pay towards your student loans in a given tax or calendar year, right? And you shave a year or 5 years or 10 years off, you're talking, hundreds of thousands of dollars in some instances, right? So it really is worth your time and effort to check out whether or not consolidation will help to increase your forgiveness eligible time under this count adjustment. This is another one that's been coming up recently, right? This is not a topic I thought we would have to talk about probably for another 10 or 15 years, but the forgiveness count adjustment has really kind of accelerated that. But because, people that have been in repayment for a really long time, or people that are maybe non-traditional students that still have student loans, are either facing retirement or kind of partially retired or already retired, right? That can have a significant impact on your forgiveness or your student loan repayment strategy. When I read this particular one, I'm 80 years old. I still have 8 more years in repayment. I still work part-time, but maybe not for 8 more years. That kind of implies to me that you feel like you have to keep working until you hit the end of your student loan repayment period. And that's not, you really don't, right? I mean, the way that the income-driven plans work, if you are retired and you're earning less income, or your retirement distributions are less than maybe your working income, your student loan payment will be lower, right? So this comes up a lot lately on the student debt message boards. I mean, people who think that they need to eliminate their student loans before they actually retire. And if you expect your income to be lower in retirement than it is while you're working as a veterinarian, your student loan payment will actually go down, right? So, that I would hope that, don't let that be a barrier to, retirement, right? Because, these options kind of open the door to a whole lot of, interesting things that you may not have thought were possible before with your student loans. All right, but you do have to consolidate by the April 30th is kind of the deadline, right? So even if you submit, you don't have to have the consolidation done by April 30th because that wouldn't probably be realistic right now. But as long as you have the application submitted, right, and it gets processed before April 30th, you don't have to worry about meeting that deadline. The only exception to that would be if they rejected your application for some reason. So that's why you want to give yourself some time. I don't see that happen very often, but it can. So you want to make sure you're not waiting until April 29th or 30th to submit that application the first time, right? So give yourself some time to work through it. It generally confuses people. Ask questions while you're working through that application if you're not sure what any of the terminology means. All right, so this is kind of some guidelines in terms of what you should be looking for, right? If you have any kind of non-direct loans, so health profession student loans, loans for disadvantaged students, Perkins loans, these older federal family education loans, consider consolidating at least those loans, if not all of your loans, right? So that's kind of the first trigger we're looking for. If you've got repayment time or public service loan forgiveness time on loans from either before vet school or in the public service loan forgiveness example, we've seen a lot of people who graduate from veterinary school, they start working for a nonprofit, have logged some public service loan forgiveness time, then they go do a master's of public health, they take on more student loans. Those student loans have a different number of qualifying public service loan forgiveness years than their vet school loans. You can actually consolidate those all together and get the maximum public service loan forgiveness count. We've seen that happen too for many of our colleagues on the that we've counseled through this on the message boards as well, right? So getting that maximum number, that maximum either public service loan forgiveness count or your income-driven repayment forgiveness count on all of your loans is ultimately the goal. And oftentimes consolidation is required to do that, particularly if you have loans with differing amounts of forgiveness time, right? So coming back to that example of I finished my undergrad maybe in 2010, and I took 5 years off before I went to vet school in 2015, and then I graduated vet school in 2019, right? So my vet school loans have 5 years of repayment, but my undergraduate loans have an additional 5 years of repayment. If I consolidate them all together, my new consolidation loan would have 10 years of qualifying forgiveness time, right? That's what we're looking for in the student aid data files when we're picking through them. Are there breaks in that repayment, that borrowing, where you had a chunk of repayment time before you started borrowing again in the future? Some of you might still be using the old version of IBR. It's obsolete with the new release of SAVE. Generally, when I see people that have loans that are in the old version of IBR and maybe you have some cleanup that you can do with a consolidation, I'm going to recommend that you consolidate those loans. If you have a mixture of loans that are consolidated and not consolidated, that's usually an indication that you probably have loans that have one set of loans has a higher amount of repayment time than another set, right? So you probably want to take this as an opportunity to consolidate those groups of loans together again to get the maximum count adjustment. We've seen some shifting around of the loan servicers, and some of them have kind of broken off arms of their federal student loan servicing business to just their commercial lending servicing business. So a good example of this is Navient and AidVantage. Right, so AidVantage services the federal student loans, Navient services the private student loans. AES only services federal family education loans. So if you have loans with AES, you should be putting that consolidation on your radar. Sloan is the next iteration of this. Somebody asked about that too. Sloan is kind of the special servicing arm of Nelnet, commercially held federal family education loan. So if you're getting emails from Sloan, you should be thinking about consolidating your loans before this deadline. Right now, that doesn't always work out, but these are some clues that, if you've got loans with Navient, you've got loans with AES, you've got loans with Sloan, then you want to consolidate before this April 30th deadline. All right, I've got here. Let me show you this first example using the My Student Loans tool. This is on the VIN Foundation Student Debt Center, which is a publicly available tool. It's available to anyone. Everyone does use this, but it is designed specifically for veterinarians and veterinary students. If you have a VIN username and password, you don't have to be an active VIN member, but if you have a VIN username and password, you can log in and you can get some special assistance on the student debt message boards, and it will also keep that information in here so you don't have to constantly re-upload it if you're kind of working with a student aid data file between now and maybe the next 30 days or something like that. This is what that looks like. So if you're logged in, you can see here it knows that I'm logged in, and I've got more than 600 files that I've uploaded into here, and it saves those particular files under my VIN account. All right, so I'm going to take that student aid data file that we just obtained from studentaid.gov, and I'm going to upload it into the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool. And this is an example of somebody who I have been kind of, telling to run to consolidate their loans when we find them on the student debt message boards, right? So some of you may have even seen these, right? So if you've uploaded your file and you see an alert like this, right, this is another trigger that you need to do something, right? This means because we've set up some flags in the system to identify when we find these older failed program loans for you to act, right? So this is kind of that first nudge, like here, hey, we found these loan types that really should be consolidated before this April 30th deadline, right? Here's some more information on that, right? So when we close out of that, this is how we evaluate it, right? So this is somebody who graduated in 2006. They've got a little less than $100,000 of student loan balance remaining. Their weighted average interest rate is 4.75. Here's that loan servicer we were just talking about, American Education Services, AES. They've got 2 loans remaining with them. They're probably consolidation loans. If I look at the types, I see that their federal family education loan fell consolidated loans, right? These are these loan types by themselves are not eligible for the forgiveness count adjustment, right? But you can consolidate them into a new direct consolidation loan, and they will be considered in the one-time count adjustment, right? And with a graduation year of 2006, they should receive, ballpark at least 17, 18 years of forgiveness qualifying time, even though they probably haven't been using an income-driven plan or some other forgiveness eligible plan along the way, right? So that's kind of what we're looking for. These are like the more, immediate. I know you need to act, right? When we find this, what I call profile 4, right? If you look at this income-driven repayment eligibility tab and you see 100% of your loans are only eligible for the IBR 2009 plan, then you need to run to the consolidation application, right? Because you have to consolidate before the end of April in order to have your loans considered under the count adjustment. And there's really no reason not to, right? So your interest rate's going to stay the same as this 4.75 here. You'll get the forgiveness count adjustment. And even if it turns out that you don't end up satisfying the rest of the maybe 8 years in this case of forgiveness time required to reach forgiveness, you can still choose to pay the same amount you were paying before, or you can extend the plan out even longer. It's really up to you, right? But it really should bank that forgiveness time at a minimum, right? There's really no downside to that other than the administrative burden of actually going through the consolidation process. it's better to have that forgiveness time than not, just in case you need it. Right.
Hey,
So I would
Tony,
really encourage you to do that in these particular cases. Yep.
couple of questions. As you mentioned, that administrative burden of the consolidation, there was
Yeah.
a question in the Q&A. Should I pay a third party to process my consolidation loan and a new IBR plan for a fee approximately $2,500?
Oh God, no, please don't do that. Oh, wow. That's a lot.
Yeah.
You can, yeah, I would not. I mean, you know, a couple of problems there. One, it shouldn't cost you anything, right? It really is free. I mean, $2,500 is an insane amount of money for something that will take you 10 or 15 minutes. If you want to, go ahead, but then you have to also wonder if they submitted it correctly on your behalf. And, you know, it's just a lot that could potentially go wrong, and then you have no idea why, right? So I would never do that. You know, please don't do that. But you know, it's again, it's up to you. And I couldn't even tell you if, you know, whoever you're paying to do that, if that would be a good idea or bad idea, right? I mean, all I know is it's unnecessary, right? So if you come over back to studentaid.gov and it logged me out, but if you go under loan repayment and hit consolidate loans, right? This is like, it will, and if you log in, it'll pull all of your loans into the consolidation application for you, right? And it's really, at that point, it's really just, you're just kind of clicking the next button, next to actually get the consolidation application submitted, right? So yeah, I would save yourself the $2,500 and submit that yourself. And if you want, you know, if you have questions about it, you can post on the student debt message boards, and we can talk you through that. So we do that a lot, right? So yeah, I think that's just not necessary. So here's the apply consolidation. I can only take you so far here. My loans are already consolidated, but if I hit apply now, right, it'll here it wants you to confirm all of your personal information. Hit continue, right? It's got all of my name and all that jazz. Let's see if it won't. Hell, it's going to make me put my driver's license information in there. So I can't really take you too far into that, but it's not that complicated, right? It really wow. I'm kind of surprised that somebody would be bold enough to charge that much for a consolidation application. When you do get to the end of the consolidation, just be aware that you're going to see a lot of scary language, right? Because typically a consolidation loan resets your forgiveness time, and it's going to pretend you're starting your repayment from zero, right? So it's going to show you that you're not going to pay your loans for another 25 or 30 years, and that you're not potentially going to hit forgiveness for another 25 years, right? None of that is correct, right? Because they haven't applied the count adjustment yet, but you need to get the loans through the consolidation process so you can be eligible for the count application, right? So to have the count applied to your loans, right? So this is usually where people stop, and then they post on the boards and are like, what's up with this? You know, why am I going to be in repayment for another 30 years? And it's because they haven't accounted for that in the system yet, right? Hopefully after the count adjustment is applied for people who are doing that in the future, that stuff will all kind of be worked into the analysis. Yeah, I'm just kind of scanning through the chat over here too, and it says Janet asked, when I log into my account and my husband's, there are 2 previous consolidation loans, FEL program consolidation loans for each of us. Do we still need to consolidate? So that sounds, and again, I don't know without seeing those loans specifically, but if they're FELP or FFELP, FEL program loans, that's exactly like this person's. These are FEL consolidated loans that need to be consolidated again, right? So I would highly recommend consolidating those. Again, you can consolidate loans that have already been consolidated again, especially if they're FEL program loans, right? So if you see that in your files, then you're going to want to submit your consolidation application. Great. All right. I'm going to, all right, so this is a good, I see another question in there about which repayment plan to choose. So again, first step is get through the consolidation application. As part of the consolidation application, they will ask you which repayment plan do you want to use. It really doesn't matter right now. Choose the one that has the lowest monthly payment. Right? But after the count is applied, if you still have time required to reach forgiveness, then you're going to have to put your loans into an income driven or some kind of forgiveness eligible plan, right? So that's going to be ICR, IBR, pay as you earn, save. Those are the forgiveness eligible plans. You can also make a fixed 10-year plan payment that will be considered forgiveness eligible as well, but that's a little harder to do, right? For some of you, that will be the only payment that will make sense, but that's going to require a little bit more work on your end to make sure that you're actually making the correct payment and confirm that with your loan servicer. But for the purpose of getting your loans into the consolidation application submitted so you can have the count applied, it doesn't matter which plan you choose. Right? Any repayment plan is considered to be forgiveness eligible until the count adjustment is applied. Right? So you can certainly look at the plan amounts that they're going to show you and kind of put a pin in which one looks to be the most beneficial for you, but it doesn't matter which one you choose. Right? But for the time being, choose the one that has the lowest monthly payment. Right? But then if it's not one of these plans already, then you're going to need to switch to one of these forgiveness eligible plans after that count is applied. All right. Okay, let's see. Any other questions on the consolidation before I move on to the recertification stuff? Looks like I see some in here. If Ashley's asking, if I only have 2 fells and the rest are direct Staffords, do I only consolidate the fells? Oh, that's a great question. So I've got a good example of that one. So that's a tough call, right? So that's going to depend on a number of other factors. So let me upload the other example I have for that. But you can do partial consolidations, right? So for some of you, and this is a little bit harder to tell, it might make sense to just like in Ashley's example, if you only have 2 fells and the rest are direct loans, right? You'll still get this alert, right? Because we identified that you have FFEL program loans in your student aid file, right? But it might be a very small percentage, right? In this particular example, this person has direct loans, and 1% are these FFEL program loans. They have 1 remaining FFEL program loan and a small balance relative to the rest of it. But when we start looking at the rest of the details, right? So if I look at this show details, I see they're in the pay-as-you-earn repayment plan for the direct loans, right? And the repayment plan isn't listed for the FFEL program loans because they're that federally held type that isn't eligible for the forgiveness count adjustment and also doesn't show your repayment plan details. But FFEL program loans are not eligible for pay-as-you-earn, right? They're only eligible for the old version of IBR 2009. So if you wanted to, you could consolidate just this loan by itself into a new direct consolidation loan, and it would be also eligible for pay-as-you-earn. And it would also be on the same forgiveness clock as this group of loans and pay-as-you-earn. Right. So this is up to this person if they want to do that for $2,100 of student loan balance. Right. So I kind of literally pulled a number out of my rear end when I wrote some blog posts about this. But if you see maybe 10% or more of your balance in this FFEL program category, then it might be worth consolidating before the April 30th deadline, but you could do a partial consolidation. I mean, this person could certainly choose to do it too with this 1%. It's up to them, right? But at some point, it's just not worth your time, right? But it really, it's kind of optional at that point. But the higher this percentage is, the higher this balance is, particularly if you have loans in pay-as-you-earn versus, and this other chunk is in IBR 2009, those have different forgiveness clocks. They have different forgiveness timelines, right? So pay as you earn forgiveness happens at 20 years. IBR 2009 forgiveness happens at 25 years, right? So if you want all of those loans to be forgiven at the same time in the shorter repayment time frame, then consolidate this portion so they'll be on the same clock and covered under the same payment as this chunk of loans. Right. So that it gets a little bit more confusing, right? I wish they were all as straightforward as that first example where I could tell you to run to consolidate, but they don't, they're not all like that, right? Some of them get like this and everywhere in between. So it's really kind of more up to you and what your overall repayment strategy is and whether or not you think you could benefit from converting this remaining chunk into a loan type that would be eligible for this pay-as-you-earn repayment plan to receive forgiveness sooner.
Got a couple of really common questions that I want to make sure we get to here. Do we have to apply to qualify for the one-time count adjustment, or is it automatic if our loans qualify?
So the one-time count adjustment will be automatically applied to everyone who has federally held student loans. All direct loans are federally held. FFEL program loans can either be federally held or privately held. In this particular example, these are privately held, right? Privately held FFEL program loans are not automatically eligible for the forgiveness count adjustment, right? But they could be made eligible if you consolidate them into a direct loan, right? Now, the account adjustment will be automatically applied to anybody that has federally held student loan balances, but you won't automatically get the maximum count across all of the loans unless they're consolidated, right? So that's if you have loans with differing amounts, and this we see this again every day, people that have differing amounts of repayment time on loans that are unconsolidated. When that count adjustment is applied, you're going to have some loans that have one count and other loans that have a different count. Right? The consolidation is what assures that new consolidation loan, when the count is applied, it will receive the maximum count adjustment. Right? So, and that's a little bit more difficult to tell from your loan portfolio, but your history, your personal knowledge of your student loan borrowing history should help. Right? So when I'm looking for stuff like that, I usually sort the loans by date, and I'm looking for breaks in the borrowing history to see if there might be some additional repayment time. And in this particular example, I'm not seeing any, right? It's a pretty consistent borrowing. So starting in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, then graduation, right? All of those loans have the exact same repayment time, right? Because there was never an opportunity where they were out of school long enough for any chunk of those loans to officially enter repayment, right? So you're not going to gain any forgiveness time in this particular example by consolidating, but they can gain this particular portion of their balance to be eligible for pay as you earn, which would be forgiven sooner rather than the 25-year time frame that these loans are on. So kind of related to that, Desiree asked, time for count starts when repayment starts, or what if you paid on some of them while in school? Yeah, that's a great question. So in some common source of confusion, the time counts when the loans entered repayment. When your loans are in school, they're not in repayment. Even if you made payments on them while you're in school, that doesn't count, right? Your in-school time does not count towards the forgiveness count adjustment, and neither does the grace period, right? So grace period time also does not count. So even if you made payments during those periods, that does not count towards the forgiveness count. So your loans had to be in a repayment status or some eligible deferment or forbearance status, not an in-school deferment, to be eligible for the count adjustment.
Another common question here, Tony, could this benefit go away with a new administration in January?
Well, if the count adjustment is applied in July, right, so the count will be there and the new rules are already in place, it's going to be very difficult to just undo all of that. Right. So once and we've seen this, I've got another example of this too. This is what it'll probably look like. So we've got a model for this, right? So public service loan forgiveness has been counting your forgiveness time for a long time, right? For at least the last, I think, 11 years or so. So this particular person has public service loan forgiveness time logged in their file. And this is probably what the count adjustment is going to look like, right? So in anybody here who's working towards public service loan forgiveness, if you've documented that progress appropriately, you'll see how many qualifying months you have logged towards forgiveness. Chances are we're going to see something that looks just like this when the count is applied, right? So by July 1st, they're going to have a new field in the student aid data file that will say IDR forgiveness count or something like that, and it'll be something that we can look up. But that will be kind of the official count that is used by the Department of Education, by the loan servicers to track where you are in repayment. And once you hit 20 or 25 years in repayment, then your loans are forgiven. Right? That's how the law is set up. Right. So, I guess we could see some future administration try to, I don't know, disregard the numbers or something like that. But that's a very low probability occurrence, most likely, right? Kind of cross that bridge when we get to it. Right? It's more likely than not that once you see that count, that it's going to be nearly impossible to undo. Right. And that's going to be the metric that everybody uses to base where they are in forgiveness and what determines when those loans get forgiven. So I would certainly rather have the count applied in my file and something that I can use to fight for that forgiveness than to not have the count at all. Right. So I would highly encourage you to, regardless of what happens in November, I want that number. I want to see what that number is. Right. I mean, and then we could deal with whatever comes next later. All right. Okay. I'm just going to leave this up there and I'm going to kind of look at some of these other ones here. Looking for kind of consolidation questions. Yeah, there's one in here that I'm looking at. Like, so I'm reading this. It's from an anonymous submitter. It says, I have direct consolidated student loans. I have been paying since 2007 on the standard repayment plan. Will there be a benefit from the one-time adjustment with this situation? There will be, right? So because again, you have direct consolidated loans, right? They're probably, fully consolidated. That's, and I have another example of that. I'll actually show you what that looks like. If you open up you upload your student aid file and you see your loans are fully consolidated, right? The only loans that you have left are consolidated loans. Then you're automatically going to receive the maximum forgiveness count adjustment that you can receive. However, the standard consolidation plan will not be forgiveness eligible after the count is applied. Right? So if you graduated in 2007 and consolidated your loans, you probably have or will receive something close to 17 years of forgiveness qualifying time. If you want to hit forgiveness in another 8 years to get to the 25-year mark, you're going to have to switch to a plan that's not the standard consolidation repayment plan. Right? Because the standard consolidation repayment plan for nearly every veterinarian is not forgiveness eligible. Right? So you're going to have to choose one of those other forgiveness eligible plans like ICR, IBR, SAVE in order to reach that forgiveness finish line. Let me see if I can find this one that's got the fully consolidated loans. I think it is maybe this one. Nope, not this one. Sorry. Try the other one. see if I can get that to work. 2, we've already counted. 3, let's try 1. Yep, fully consolidated. So this is a 2019 graduate, so more recent. But when I look at the loans remaining, there's only one left, right? And it's a consolidated unsubsidized loan. Now, sometimes like the anonymous question that we just went through, you'll see 2 components of your consolidation loan. You'll see a direct consolidated unsubsidized portion, and you'll see a direct consolidated subsidized portion. They usually break those up and they keep them separate because your subsidized loans have different benefits than your unsubsidized loans. And that's more of a loan servicer designation, so they know how to treat them if you ever need to use those benefits between those 2. So you might see more than in most cases, if your loans are fully consolidated into a direct consolidation loan, you'll see 2 loans, a unsubsidized and a subsidized component. But this person only has 1 component because they pretty much did away with subsidized loans for most graduate school students after 2012. So they only had unsubsidized loans to consolidate. So that's why there's only 1 loan left here. But this person also doesn't need to do anything, right? They're already in line to receive the maximum count adjustment that they can possibly receive. All right, cool. So let's just talk about recertification deadlines for a minute. That was a pretty big change when we re-entered repayment. The pandemic forbearance benefits ended. Nobody really knew what to expect from recertification. We've been, sitting on, repayment amounts for those of us that have been using income-driven repayment plans for nearly 4 years, right? So, and a lot of our incomes have changed in that period of time, particularly with the increased demand in veterinary services during the pandemic and beyond. Right, there was, it was nice to have those very low payments in many cases for as long as possible, but at some point we're going to have to provide updated income information. Well, that some point got pushed even further into the future. It was supposed to start this month. For some people, it had already started. They had already provided information and maybe their payments had been updated. Anybody that has already updated their income information for the same plan that they were recertifying their income for will actually have your payment reduced back to what it was before until November 1st. Right, so they paused the recertification requirement for anybody that was due to recertify between March and before November 1st. They pushed that anniversary date out to November 1st. Right, and they also changed when you're supposed to provide that information. I think this is what tripped up a lot of people. In the past, you could provide that information, 10 days before your anniversary date and you were fine. But the loan servicers have been so bad at processing the information and getting people back up to speed that they magically decided they needed the information 35 days before and didn't really tell anybody that. So it's just been a real mess when it had come to start repayment again and asking for their information. So the Department of Education said, okay, hold up, we're going to push this out in the future. You can keep your 35-day requirement, right? But we're going to, make sure that we have some time to tell people that. So that's now everybody's anniversary date, at least the ones that were before November 1st have all gotten pushed out to November 1st, which means you'll have to provide your information by, I think it's mid-September or late September. I think September 24th or 5th is technically the 35th day before that November 1st deadline. So this is a good opportunity kind of to review what these dates mean, right? So your anniversary date is technically your expiration date, right? You can't wait until the actual anniversary date to provide your annual income information. You have to provide it a little bit beforehand, right? Again, you used to be 10 days, now it's 35 days. Provide it before the 35 days. They still don't change. They don't update the payment until the next statement after your anniversary date, right? So even though in this case, let's say your anniversary date is November 1st now, and you provide that income information on September 1st, your payment won't change until the statement after November 1st. Right. So I think a lot of people were holding off on renewing or recertifying their income because they thought if they provided it early, their payment would go up sooner. But it actually goes up after your anniversary date, right? So it's the payment schedule that is covered by the next 12 months starting after your anniversary date, right? And then we kind of repeat that on an annual cycle. So the anniversary dates can be really confusing. I think, let's see if we've got anybody who's using an income-driven plan will have an anniversary date, right? So here's our example, right? Anniversary date. They're using the old version of IBR. Their anniversary date is technically not until after November 1st, so November 14th, right? But they're using the old version of IBR, right? They need to get out of that plan. They do have a very favorable payment here, but this particular person actually has a significant amount of forgiveness time that they can earn from their past borrowing history, right? So this is one that actually would benefit from consolidating, right? Here's one of those gaps that I look for, right? I've got loans from 2003, but then I don't see loans again until 2006, right? And then again, not until 2010. This is somebody who stands to add, I think it was 5 or 6 years to their forgiveness eligible time if they consolidate their loans before the April 30th deadline, right? So this is another good example of those that, while they might have all direct loans remaining, their history and the repayment plan that they're using suggests that they should run to consolidate before that April 30th deadline. All right. Any other questions? So recertifying versus switching. So switching is I actually just posted a blog on this. So switching is different than recertifying. Now they do overlap a little bit, right? So if you want to keep your current low payment for as long as possible, that's cool, right? As long as you don't have any reason to consolidate to maximize your forgiveness count adjustment, that takes precedent, right? You should focus on that first, right? That's why I'm a little bit miffed at this extension, because now it pushes it beyond the forgiveness count adjustment window where people are kind of like, oh, well, I've got a lower payment for longer, where it might have been way more beneficial if they consolidated their loans. And if you have to consolidate, you're going to have to provide new income information too, right? So consolidation is going to require you to provide updated income information. If you switch plans, it will require you to provide updated income information. So those are triggers that you just can't avoid when you switch, when you consolidate. But recertifying is a little bit different, right? Recertifying is kind of that annual process that you're recertifying your income and family information for that same plan that you are currently on. Right. So if you can get it to work out, let's say you've already consolidated your loans, or all of your loans were already just from vet school and are going to receive the maximum count adjustment no matter what, or there's no reason for you to consolidate because your loans all have the same repayment time and they're already all direct loans. Maybe you've got a really beneficial minimum monthly payment because the last time you provided income information was 2020, and you want to keep that until 2025 or whatever, and then maybe switch into the new save plan. That's perfectly fine, right? You can use the system to your advantage that way, right? I've got a super low payment using maybe IBR 2009 or pay as you earn, but I know I ultimately want to get into the new save plan. Keep that really low payment for as long as possible, and then switch when you're next due to recertify your income for that current plan, right? But just don't let that push you out of receiving the forgiveness count adjustment, because that's going to be way more beneficial than a lower payment for maybe another year. What if your anniversary date is blank? Now, if your anniversary date is blank, then I'm guessing you either have FFEL program loans or you're not using an income-driven plan, right? Those are usually, so here's one that is blank, right? But that's because these are those FFEL program loans, right? So the FFEL program loans, is particularly the privately held FFEL program loans, are notorious for not having this information in the student aid data file. So that's kind of another one of those like flags that are going off in the back of my mind. Does that person particularly have the loan types that need to be consolidated? If you have pay so you have to switch, will that trigger the need to recertify? Pamela, can you give me a little more information on that? If you have pay so you have to switch, you shouldn't have to switch if you have pay. And maybe you're referring to the phase out of pay. So that's one thing that we haven't talked about yet. Yeah, pay, yes, correct. So pay is going away, but if you're in pay, you can keep using it, right? Pay is only going away for people who haven't selected it before July 1st of 2024, right? So if you're using pay and you want to keep using pay and your next recertification date is way past July 1st of 2024, then you don't have to do anything. Right. So as long as you're in pay as you earn before it gets phased out, you can keep using it for as long as you want. But after July 1st of 2024, if you were to leave pay as you earn for any reason, or anybody who didn't get their loans into pay before July 1st of 2024 will no longer be able to select that as a repayment option. Right. So yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I'm glad you attended tonight, right? Because that's some of the other information we wanted to make sure that everybody's aware of. Right. So pay as you earn ICR is also going to be phased out. Right. So in ICR is not a plan that most people are going to benefit from, but for some of you that have graduation years in the 1990s or early 2000s that have a relatively small balance remaining, but could be knocking on the door of forgiveness after the count adjustment, ICR could be a very helpful plan for you. And you have to choose ICR before July 1st of 2024, otherwise it goes away, right? You won't be able to get into it, right? But once you're in it, you can keep using it to satisfy whatever remaining time you have until you reach forgiveness, right? So as part of the new changes that have happened with SAVE being created, they're also phasing out pay as you earn and ICR on July 1st of 2024. But that phase out means that as long as you're using it before that date, you can keep using it, but nobody will be able to select it after that July 1st date. All right, let's see. Repayment plans are standard 30 and standard 20. I figured those are why I am not getting an anniversary date. Yeah, that's correct, right? So Lee's providing some more information on why you're not seeing an anniversary date. Yeah, the standard plans will not have anniversary dates, right? Because they don't require your income information. The only plans that require your income information are income-driven plans, right? So standard plans, extended plans, graduated plans do not have anniversary dates. All right, how are we doing so far? Anybody, am I missing anything? Becca, you see anything in there that I ran over or?
There was one I had down here. Hang on one second. If I consolidate it and stay with my standard plan, will my monthly payment increase? I tried switching to an income-based plan and it was a higher payment that I could not afford.
Yeah, so and that's one of the complicating factors of the forgiveness count adjustment for some people, right? So when you reconsolidate your loans or you consolidate them into a new direct consolidation loan, some of the income-driven plans, particularly if you've got a pretty robust income, being a late career veterinarian, or you filed your taxes jointly and your spouse has a pretty robust income, those payments can be pretty high in those income-driven plans. That's where a plan like ICR can help, right? Because it just has some interesting provisions, particularly if you have a relatively lower balance remaining, where the payment won't be as high as it might be using a plan like SAVE or IBR, right? So you can choose the standard plan for now to get through the consolidation application and bank that forgiveness time. But once that count is applied, if you want to hit forgiveness, you're going to have to get it into a forgiveness eligible plan. And that's for folks who fall into that category where the income-driven plans are generally too high or higher than they would prefer. That's where we look at maybe a fixed 10-year plan payment on the new consolidation loan, or ICR sometimes will be a viable option. But if not, then you can feel free to pay. You can put your loans on that standard plan and pay what you were paying before, and you'll pay the balance of zero in the same time frame you were on previously, right? But they're all usually options. It's very, very rare. I mean, I think it's only been, man, we've done thousands of these lately, and I think literally I can count on one hand the people that I've told, maybe you won't reach forgiveness. Right. So it's pretty rare, right? We can usually find some combination of things you can try before we kind of hit just keep it in the standard payment and just pay it to zero. Here's one that's got some thumbs up here. I've attended your previous seminar. I've moved all my loans to Mohila. Mohila does not have any indication or way of knowing when my loan forgiveness is. Yeah, none of the loan servicers do, right? Don't be surprised if they tell you that. The account adjustment is set to fix that. One page indicated that it will be forgiven in 30 years. I should have 9 years left. Yeah, so that's exactly what I was talking about when I was saying when you submit the consolidation application, most of you are going to see a 30-year repayment time frame. That's not correct, right? It's not correct because it doesn't account for your prior repayment time, right? It's more likely that you are going to have that 9 years left, right? But you're going to have to wait until you get the count adjustment applied to confirm that, right? Mohila is not going to be able to tell you that information, right? So you're just going to have to wait and trust that the count is going to be applied as it's been written and as it has been for those folks that have already received forgiveness, but the rest of us will receive that count by July 1st.
There's a question here about does switching plans change your timeline on forgiveness if you have all direct loans?
Yeah, switching plans never changes your forgiveness time frame, right? Unless you switch to a plan that has a longer time frame. Right, so you still keep the forgiveness time that you've earned, right? So this is one of these days I'm going to figure. This is kind of like the ever since I've been doing this now for like 12 years, and we still haven't been able to convince everybody to not defer their student loans when they do an internship or residency. Someday, 20 years from now, maybe we'll accomplish that goal. But the other one that really we just cannot seem to extinguish is this idea that if I switch from one income-driven plan to another, that my clock starts over. And that's never been the case, right? That has never happened, right? There have been opportunities, or there have been instances in the past where if you consolidated, it would restart your clock, right? But that doesn't happen anymore either. Right, so that's a recent change that it will no longer be the case going forward, even after this forgiveness count adjustment period is over. So if you had 10 years of forgiveness time on IBR 2009 and you switched to SAVE, you still have the same 10 years of forgiveness time, and you're still on the same 25-year forgiveness time frame. So don't worry about losing your forgiveness time switching from one plan to another. But the forgiveness count adjustment will really help to kind of document that, right? So you can actually see that that's actually happening. All right.
There's a question here, just a clarification. If you have consolidated loans and you're not using an income-driven repayment plan, do you have to change to something like SAVE before April 30th?
No, you do not, right? So yeah, good clarification question there. So the April 30th deadline is the deadline by which you have to have submitted a consolidation application if you want to benefit from the count adjustment, right? So after, people that submit consolidations after the April 30th deadline, that new consolidation loan is not going to receive that count adjustment consideration. Right, so the April 30th deadline is strictly the deadline for when you have to submit the consolidation application to receive the forgiveness count consideration. That's it. Right, that's the only thing that applies to that deadline. If you after your count is applied, right? So you submit your application for consolidation by April 30th, if that's going to help you, and you receive your count by July 1st of 2024, that's when you're going to have to change from a standard plan to some forgiveness eligible plan if you want to go on to receive forgiveness after that. So, and I don't know. I mean, they just right now the only guidance says they'll have the count applied by July 1st. I don't know if that means that some people are going to receive it sooner than others, or everybody's going to receive it on July 1st. It's that, TBD, right? We'll see what that looks like. But once you do receive your count adjustment, if you're not using a qualifying forgiveness plan, then you will not be continuing to log forgiveness progress.
We have another one here. I've already consolidated my loans in 2021, but still have the IBR 2009 plan. Can I keep this? I have not switched for payment plans because this has the lowest monthly payment.
Yeah, it depends on what your income is now, and that's fine. Again, that kind of falls under that category of, you can strategically use the recertification extensions to your advantage, so you can keep that lower payment. But then before you're next due to recertify, you really want to get those loans out of that plan and into a plan like Save. Right, but graduating in 2021 too, I would want to check to make sure you're not eligible for pay as you earn or IBR, 2014. So there's other things that I would want to look at there, just to be sure, based on your graduation year, that you're using the most beneficial plan going forward.
I just see another question here that pay sounds like a good option. Can you talk a little bit about who may or may not be eligible for pay and show that income driven repayment eligibility tab again, Tony?
Yeah, sure. So let's see. I've got a couple of different options here. So this is a 2013 grad who is eligible for pay as you earn, is using pay as you earn. This combination of repayment plan eligibility, I call income driven repayment plan profile 2, which is otherwise known as the pickle, right? These are the people who have the opportunity to use pay as you earn as long as they're in it before July 1st of 2014, or 2024, sorry. But after that, it'll be phased out. And it can be difficult to choose between pay as you earn and the new Save plan. Right? There are some really enticing benefits in the Save plan. Generally speaking, it's going to have a lower monthly payment than pay as you earn. It's also going to cover all of your unpaid interest, right? So in this particular example, this person's accruing $1,800 a month of interest. Their monthly payment is $1,300. Under the pay as you earn plan, that $500 shortfall is added to their unpaid interest balance. Right? That's how it got to this number in the first place. Under the new Save plan, that $500 shortfall is covered by the Department of Education. Right? So that $500 goes away, right? It's covered under the 100% unpaid interest subsidy, which means this unpaid interest balance would no longer grow going forward. But the trade-off between pay as you earn and Save is that pay as you earn offers forgiveness at 20 years of total repayment. Save requires 25 years for folks that have graduate school student loan balances, right? So we have, and hence the pickle, right? So there's this tug of war between, do I want to pay less, not see my unpaid interest balance decrease, which forces me into repayment longer, or am I cool with paying a little bit higher monthly payment, watching my unpaid interest balance increase and hitting forgiveness sooner? Right? It's a tough call, and we use the loan repayment simulator generally to try to help make those decisions. One of the other giveaways here that would encourage me to have this person switch from pay as you earn to Save is public service loan forgiveness. Right? Anybody that's on a track to receive public service loan forgiveness, right? So you're working for a nonprofit employer, you're using an income-driven plan, you're hoping to have your remaining loan balance forgiven tax-free after hitting 120 months or 10 years of public service loan forgiveness time. You want to pay as little as you possibly have to, and that will be using Save, right? So in this particular case, if this person was relatively confident that they were going to continue their career in this nonprofit environment, then I would encourage them to switch from pay to Save. But that's just one example of when we would, favor save over pay, recognizing that if they do leave pay, they're not going to be able to get back in after July 1st of 2024, right? So that's a you've got a few more months, more than the one-time count adjustment deadline to consider that, but that's a tough one, right? That's one where we run some simulations, we look at numbers, what's more likely, and how do you feel about being in repayment longer versus shorter, right? So those are tough decisions.
A lot of similar questions here along the same lines of how will I know when the adjustment has been applied? And then once it has, how can I see what my forgiveness count is? And is there any way to see that forgiveness count now?
No, there's no way to see it now, unless you're working towards public service loan forgiveness. You can only estimate it now. A good proxy is your graduation year, right? So this person, this person started taking out some new loans. They graduated vet school in 2013, but they took out some additional loans after that triggered a new graduation date. But if they graduated vet school in 2013, ballpark 11 years in repayment, right? So you could ballpark it, right? But until you see the actual number, when the count adjustment is applied, we can't really say for sure. And as soon as we know, you'll know, right? And maybe you'll know before we know, right? But we're constantly looking at these files and looking for that additional information to be applied there. I don't think it's going to be a secret, right? And this is something that this administration wants to get out before election time, because again, it's super beneficial, right? So it's not going to really make a lot of sense for them to keep it a secret. So once that count is applied, I think it's going to be shouted from the rooftops, and as soon as we find it, we'll shout it from the rooftops too. So you're just going to have to wait until you actually see the number. All right, I see somebody. It is a rainbow trout. Good call. All right. I see somebody wants me to repeat what I said about deferment for advanced training. Yeah, do not defer your loans, right? There's no good reason to defer your loans during internship residency training, right? You use an income-driven plan. Ideally, you would use SAVE, and SAVE will cover all of the interest while you're in that advanced training, while your income is generally lower than it will be as a private practitioner or as a specialist, right? So there's really no financial benefit for you to use deferment or forbearance during advanced training. You really want to use an income-driven plan, particularly SAVE if you can, to have that interest covered. As a current resident, I'm on the pay-as-you-earn plan since SAVE wasn't available. So SAVE was kind of available, right? It was previously known as revised pay-as-you-earn, which had a 50% unpaid interest subsidy. It wasn't as beneficial as a new SAVE plan, but that's a tough call there too, right? So that's going to depend on your particular circumstances and what you think your income is going to be after your specialty training. But I would encourage you to take a peek at SAVE, right? Especially if you still have a few years left on that specialty training. That will save you a lot on unpaid interest. But you also saved a lot on unpaid interest during your training during the pandemic forbearance, right? Because the interest rates were shut off. But tell your resident mates that too, because still I find tons of them that are deferring their loans, right? So get those loans into a plan like SAVE if they can, to help to reduce the interest accumulation going forward.
Tony, you mentioned the pandemic forbearance. I've got a couple of questions here. Someone who had requested a refund of their payments that were made during COVID, they've been waiting for an answer on that refund since September. Somebody else was asking if they consolidate in order to benefit from the one-time forgiveness count adjustment. Can they get a refund of payments? And then if loans were paid off, does that count towards that account adjustment as well?
Yeah, so we'll kind of back up to the refund one. So the refund one has been really frustrating. If you keep calling on that, call the student loan ombudsman, look up the federal student loan ombudsman, call them regularly and see if you can get an update on that refund request. If you consolidate your loans, the chance of getting the refund goes away, right? So if they haven't already processed it or they haven't put that check in the mail, once you consolidate your loans, you will not receive that refund, right? But you're also running out of time to get the forgiveness count adjustment based on the consolidation, right? So if you need to consolidate to get the maximum forgiveness count adjustment, then you're going to have to pull that trigger before April 30th, right? So the farther away you get from September, the less likely it is you're going to get that refund, right? But we have found a couple of people who have still been able to tear that refund back even recently, right? So keep calling, try to get confirmation that it's in the mail. Once you have that refund, you can safely start that consolidation. But I would not wait past April 30th, particularly if you can gain a significant amount from consolidating your student loans. You may just have to abandon that refund. But in terms of the question about loans that are previously paid off, they do not count towards the forgiveness count adjustment. Only loans that still have a balance will be counted in the forgiveness count adjustment. The exception to that are loans that were previously included in a different consolidation, right? Because those loans technically still exist, right? That's why figuring out your count is so difficult, right? There's lots of people that have consolidated a lot of loans and in a lot of different ways. Trying to go back in time and figure out which loans are in which consolidation and how much time that they have is very, very tedious. So if those loans were paid through a consolidation that still exists, then you can still get repayment time on those loans. But if you paid those loan balances to zero, then those particular loans will not count towards your forgiveness count adjustment. All right. Okay. It's not the one I wanted there. Let's see. All right, so just a little bit on repayment, and this kind of touches on how to choose a repayment plan, right? We've already covered that a little bit here, but there's a lot of reason for you to consider using an income-driven repayment strategy, because now, especially with the forgiveness count adjustment, a lot of people are starting with a good chunk of forgiveness time already in the bank, right? And which means that forgiveness may be closer than you think. And depending on what your circumstances are, a lot of these plans will have you paying a low enough amount for you to reach that forgiveness. And even when it comes to most veterinarians that have a significant amount of student debt, income-driven plans are really the most financially beneficial option available. Now, they work very strangely, right? I mean, you pay a percentage of your income for a period of time, and then that any amount that's remaining at the end is forgiven, and you may or may not have to pay a tax on that, right? And that does a lot of weird things to what the total cost can look like, right? So we see quite frequently people that take longer to pay their loans off using an income-driven plan will actually pay less than people who try to pay it off sooner, right? So it kind of blows a hole in that, I need to pay the loans back as fast as possible mentality when it comes to student loans, because you could end up paying more than you otherwise would have to if you pay the loans back faster versus using an income-driven plan. So your student loans are not like any other debt, right? They're the most flexible but most annoying debt you'll ever have, but they also allow you a ton of opportunity, right? And when I try to get people to wrap their head around what the quote best repayment strategy is, it's usually using these three concepts, right? I want to first do the thing that's going to reduce the risk to myself and my family. I want to maximize my monthly cash flow, meaning I keep that payment as low as I possibly can based on my income. And if I can end up paying the least amount possible, great, right? But this is not necessarily what I'm shooting for, right? These other two actually are worth more than paying the least amount possible, right? Because we can see, thousands of dollars of differences in monthly payments compared to paying it back fast versus paying what your income requires you to pay. And that's money that you can use to better fund way more critical areas of your overall financial wellness versus trying to pay your student loans down faster, right? So that's where the maximizing the monthly cash flow comes in Generally, I would rather have more control over that cash flow so I can determine where it goes and how I use it than to just put it towards my student loans. Right. And then reducing the risk to myself and my family. This one we used in the emails, and it came from a question that somebody submitted. If I consolidate, is there a chance my loans will pass on to my kids if I die? With your federal student loans, whether you consolidate or not, there's no chance of that happening. Right. That's one of the really, I mean, there's a whole bunch of benefits that come baked into your federal student loans. Right. There's discharge provisions if you become, permanently disabled. If you die, your loans die with you. Nobody else is ever going to be responsible for paying those loans back other than you. If your income goes down, your payments can go down. Right. So there's a huge amount of insurance that's already kind of baked in to your federal student loans, which is another reason why they're not on the top of the list of things that you should pay off first. Right. They're actually probably down near the bottom, maybe even below your mortgage, right? Because of the flexibility that they have. But dealing with them really is annoying, right? I mean, especially with all the changes and how do you keep up, and what if my loan servicer is making a mistake? And so there's a lot of work that goes into it, but there's also a lot of money on the table if you take the opportunity to learn about them. All right, let me see where
Tony, we just got a question that I'm sure other people listening in have as well. Is forgiveness then eligible for those of us who do not work in public service? Is that what one of the takeaways from tonight is?
Oh, absolutely. So yeah, and that's that's another one of those ones that it's really hard to get people to kind of break out of the shell, right? So public service loan forgiveness is just a special type of forgiveness, right? A type of forgiveness that you can earn by working for a nonprofit, right? That you can earn forgiveness sooner and guaranteed not have to pay a tax on whatever's forgiven, right? But the overwhelming majority of people don't earn public service loan forgiveness, right? Because most employment is not in a nonprofit sector, right? So there is a good chunk of people who do earn that, and there's a lot of veterinarians who are on a path to do so. But most veterinarians are working for private practices, right? So they can and will and do earn income-driven repayment forgiveness, which is completely separate than public service loan forgiveness, although there's some overlap there, right? I mean, so your federal student loans offer you forgiveness, whether you're working for a nonprofit or not, through the income-driven plans. So you make payments for a specified period of time using the income-driven plans, and if you still have a balance remaining at the end of that time frame, the remaining balance is forgiven, right? That's irrespective of public service loan forgiveness, right? If you're working for a nonprofit employer, that same thing just happens faster. So it's 10 years as opposed to 20 years or 25 years, right? So yes, you do have, everybody who has federal direct loans has the opportunity for forgiveness. That's what this one-time forgiveness count, that's why this is such a big deal, right? Whether you work for a nonprofit or not, you're going to get a forgiveness count if your loans are set up to receive it. And the higher that number is, the sooner you're going to be done with repayment. Right. So hopefully that's clear, right? I mean, that's a pretty big takeaway, right? So public service loan forgiveness is not the only type of student loan forgiveness, right? It's just one type of forgiveness. I'll go back. So which plans are specifically eligible for forgiveness? So ICR, IBR, pay as you earn, but again, pay as you earn is going to be phased out, save, or you can make a fixed 10-year plan payment on your loans, which can be a little bit more difficult logistically, right? Because they won't let your consolidation loans into a fixed 10-year plan, right? So you would keep them in a standard plan, and then you would have to calculate or confirm with your loan servicer what a fixed 10-year plan payment would be for that consolidation loan, and make sure you're making that monthly payment to continue earning forgiveness credit. But the goals are similar between public service loan forgiveness and income-driven plan repayment forgiveness, is you want to pay the least amount possible so you have the maximum amount forgiven. Right? Whether you have to pay a tax on it or not will depend on when your loans are forgiven and what the rules are in place around student loan forgiveness at that time. But even if you have to pay a tax, you're going to pay less than if you paid the balance to zero.
Could you actually, because we've had a number of questions in the Q&A about what is the tax on forgiveness. So could you kind of expand on that a little bit more, Tony?
Yeah, the tax on forgiveness. So any debt that is canceled or forgiven is treated as taxable income by the IRS. So it just depends on, sorry, I'm going to click through here. It depends on how they decide to treat student loan forgiveness in the year you receive it, right? So right now, there is actually a special tax exemption on student debt forgiveness specifically if you receive that forgiveness between 2021 and 2025, right? And there are a lot of people that received it in 2023. There are going to be a lot more that receive it in 2024. There'll be a lot more even that receive it in 2025 because of a forgiveness count adjustment, right? Nobody that receives forgiveness during those years will have to pay federal income tax on the amount that's forgiven. What happens beyond 2025 will depend upon what Congress does, right? If they extend this particular provision, right? Or they let it expire, or they change it to something else, right? So right now, I think the current administration put out a proposal to make this tax exemption on student loan forgiveness permanent, right? So that would be something that they would fight for if they were to get reelected and have the congressional makeup to maybe get something like that through Congress, right? But if not, then maybe it goes away. And if you have to pay tax on what's forgiven, then the amount that's forgiven will run through your tax return, and whatever amount that is added to all of the other income and deductions and all the other things that determine your taxes will determine what you pay in taxes that year that you receive forgiveness, right? So when we recommend people use an income-driven plan, if they use the student loan repayment simulator and they see an amount forgiven and it's beyond 2025, then we ask them to plan to pay for that tax, right? So you pay your monthly student loan payment, you build a forgiveness planning fund, and then if you hit forgiveness and have to pay a tax, you're prepared to write that check to the IRS in the year that it's due. Right, so that's what it would look like if you were going to hit forgiveness and have to pay the tax. What about repay? Do we treat it the same as pay? No, those are two separate plans, right? So revised pay as you earn is now save, the new save plan. Pay as you earn is a separate type of income-driven plan that has a different forgiveness timeline, but pay as you earn is also the plan that's being phased out on July 1st of 2024. So yeah, I wouldn't treat those the same. So that's where, and maybe it's time we send some information over to the simulator and show you what that looks like, right? So this person is a 2015 graduate, but again, if they consolidate their loans, here I'm gonna send this over, they would receive an additional 5 years of repayment on their new consolidation loan, right? So if I upload my student aid data file to the My Student Loans tool and I send that information over to the simulator, it'll bring the numbers over, but I want to start looking at what some of the other inputs are, right? So I'm going to presume that they consolidate their loans, right? So other deferment / consolidation. I'm going to give them, so they have 9 years of repayment time on their veterinary school loans, but they have an additional 5 years of repayment time on loans from before veterinary school. So that's 14 years in repayment that will be credited as forgiveness eligible after they consolidate their loans. This is going to be their weighted average interest rate when they consolidate. After you're in repayment, you can sign up for auto pay and they'll give you a 0.25% interest rate reduction. So we can knock off 0.25% there, turn it into 6.5. let's assume they're earning, I think the BLS average for veterinarians is 130,000 right now, right? And well, you can change your income from year to year. You can assume a flat rate of increase, whatever you think is appropriate. Family information you can add in if that's appropriate for you. I'm going to leave that out for the purpose of this demonstration. But if you do add your spouse in and your spouse has student loans and you have dependents, you can add them all in here. That will impact what your monthly student loan payment would look like. If you are doing forgiveness planning, as we were just kind of talking about, if you have to assume you're going to pay a tax in the future, what do you think that tax is going to be? If you're starting a dedicated fund to plan for that forgiveness, what are you using? You know, savings accounts are yielding about 5% these days, right? If you have an amount already earmarked for forgiveness, we can add that to the equation as well. If I run that simulation, I can start to compare how it differs, time-driven plans, extended plans, the income-driven plans, what those payments look like compared, and then whether or not I'm projected to reach forgiveness, right? In this case, if I stick with save for the next 11 years, I have my balance plus the unpaid, I have my balance forgiven. And if I assume a 30% tax on there, it's a $160,000 tax that I would have to pay 11 years from now. That's a pretty steep deal, right? That's one of the side effects, let's say unintended consequences that we're probably going to see from this forgiveness count adjustment. We're kind of fast forwarding people into this time frame. And if you've got a really high student loan balance like this person does, and you're going to hit forgiveness sooner, then that tax is going to be pretty big and you're not going to have as much time to plan for it, right? So that's one of the reasons why I hope that they extend this tax exemption into the future, because this is going to be one of those unintended side effects for some people, particularly those people that have higher balances, right? But it's still going to be much better to be done with repayment than not. I mean, we start looking at, and you know, the bigger the numbers, the bigger the savings in these particular cases. But you start to look at, you know, how much is this person going to pay back in total compared to what they have left, versus if they tried to pay the balance to zero. I mean, it's not even in the same universe. I mean, there's literally hundreds of $500,000 difference here, right? So this is a pretty exaggerated example, again, because this person has a $500,000 of student loans, right? So, but you know, the bigger the balances, the bigger the savings that we see in these income-driven plans. Right, correct, Kyla. It looks like Becca's got you covered there too. Repay equals save, correct? Pay does not equal save. So when it comes to choosing the best repayment plan, it really comes down to which ones are you eligible for, right? So this person falls into what, and I've been kind of in the blogs and things naming these profiles, right? So this person is in profile 3, right? They're eligible for the new version of IBR or the old version of IBR and save. In that particular constellation of profiles, save is usually going to be the best available option. Right. So if you're in a different profile, depending on what you see when you upload your information, right, this person's eligible for pay as you earn. That's the pickle category, right? So choosing between pay as you earn and save requires you to run some simulations, right, to see what that difference might be for you, right? And is it appreciable enough? Is there a big enough difference between the total costs in pay and save, and do I care enough about paying 5 years longer in save to accelerate that forgiveness timeline by sticking with pay as you earn? Right, so that's how we use the simulator to try to answer those types of questions. All right, I'm gonna come back up here and look at some of these questions. I saw this one earlier, and Stephen, I don't know if you're still here. Ross grad, I have borrower defense application. That's a pretty specific topic we've been covering on the message boards. And that reminds me, I'll show you guys what the message boards looks like and how you can get help too over there. But I'm going to read Stephen's question here. So I'm a Ross grad. I have borrower defense application submitted. My loans have been in forbearance since the application was submitted, but when interest resumed in September, these loans also started accruing interest. From reading on the student aid website, it says the loans can only accrue interest for 6 months of the application. I also called my loan servicer to have my loans taken out of forbearance and put back into pay, but they told me that I can't take my loans out of forbearance without withdrawing my application. Yeah, that's not correct. So the borrower defense thing is a whole different beast. And Ross is a school that is part of the settlement. There's a specific borrower defense settlement that named a handful of schools, and anybody who got their borrower defense application in by a specified period of time will have their student loans forgiven under that settlement. But you have to kind of wait for this review period, which means that if for some reason it doesn't pan out, then your loans are going to accrue a bunch of interest that you'll have to pay back, and a lot of that time will not be eligible for forgiveness. So it really depends on which class you're in terms of that borrower defense application, how confident you are about receiving that student loan discharge, and whether or not you'd want to keep your loans in a plan like SAVE, where the interest would be covered while you're making payments, because the SAVE has 100% unpaid interest subsidy, kind of hedging your bets, if you will, recognizing that if your loans are discharged, all of those payments that you made were for nothing. But if your loans are not discharged, you still keep your loans in repayment, earning forgiveness time. And if you're using SAVE, they're covering the unpaid interest that your payment's not covering, right? So those are some, again, difficult considerations. Those are things that we like to handle over on the student debt message boards. And if you're logged in to VIN using your VIN username and password, or if you have VIN Foundation username and password, you'll have a link available to you. Again, I'm logged in here. I see student debt message boards in the nav bar up here. If I click that, I can post questions on the message boards. And there are literally thousands of these discussions where we learn all of this information by helping our colleagues work through their student loan questions, right? So, and you can even post anonymously in here, right? It looks like somebody who was attending the webinar already took advantage of this, right? So this is what this looks like. And we, go back and forth while you're working your way through the consolidation application or working your way through choosing a repayment plan, and try to help you answer those questions on the message boards. You get the answers that you need, and we all as a community kind of get to learn from the experience as well. All right, so yeah, so Stephen, I think that one is probably going to be best if we dive into your circumstances in a little bit more detail, so we know which class you're part of in that settlement application, and we can talk through some of those pros and cons. But it is not accurate for your servicer to tell you that if they put your loans into an income-driven plan, that you will lose access to that. You'll lose access to the special borrower defense forbearance, but you'll still be in the borrower defense category, right? But I don't know that it makes a lot of sense to put your loans in pay as you earn while you're in the borrower defense class waiting for your application to be processed. So if anything, SAVE would be a better choice there. But if you're in the pickle and you lose access to pay, I guess it's a consideration. But if I were in that borrower defense class, I would be leaning more towards SAVE if I were choosing to use a repayment plan at all, right? Or if I was confident I was going to receive that discharge, I might just leave the loans in that special borrower defense forbearance. Let's see. I've already consolidated out of school in 2014. Can I do it again? Trying to lower my 7% and 8% interest. Yeah, so there's a lot in there. It depends on what kind of loans you have. You graduated in 2014, means you started school in 2010, which was also the time frame that FEL program loans were around. We would really need to see your student aid data file, right? So if you upload your student aid data file, that's another benefit of the message boards. If you upload your student aid data file while you're logged in to the Student Debt Center, and then you make a post in the message boards, we can see, Becca and I can see your file, right? So anonymous, nobody else can see you and know who you are, but Becca and I will know who you are, right? The rest of the community does not, but we can see your student aid data file too. So it helps us to answer those questions that you have about your student loans. So I would really need to see some information, but you're not going to lower your interest rate. I mean, your interest rates for your student loans are fixed, right? And when you consolidate them, the consolidated rate, kind of as we started out tonight, your consolidation student loan interest rate is a weighted average of all the interest rates that went into your consolidation loan, right? So it's not going to change your student loan. It's going to be your interest rate. It's going to be about the same as it was before. Let's see, at least half of, here's an anonymous question. At least half of my $500,000 plus was from additional living expenses needed as I was a single dad of 2 babies during vet school. Is there any sort of forgiveness for the extra living expenses needed to survive? If they're federal student loans, then they would all apply, right? So it depends on how you obtain that debt. If that was extra, and you can get extra federal student loan funds when you have a family during grad school. So if those extra funds were obtained as federal student loan funds, and they're federal student loans that you see when you upload those, that upload your student aid data file into here, then absolutely, it's all part of the same rules and regulations that govern all federal student loans, right? But you want to really dig in and see how much balance you have in the federal student loan types. Is there a reason for you to consolidate some of those loans before the April 30th deadline to maximize your forgiveness count adjustment and see how much longer you might be in repayment, right? So yeah, I would definitely encourage you to grab your student aid data file and upload it, and we can see how much of that debt could be eligible for forgiveness. Does the VIN calculator account for growing interest on pay-as-you-earn repayment plan? It does. Yeah. So when you use the simulator, right, and that's why the simulator is so valuable. When you run simulations, right, we account for the fact that your pay-as-you-earn payment is different than your save payment, and the interest is treated differently in pay-as-you-earn than it's treated in save. And you'll see that in the amount that's forgiven, right? Under pay-as-you-earn, even though forgiveness happens sooner, there's a much higher amount that's forgiven in our example. And that's because pay-as-you-earn does not have the unpaid interest subsidy, right? So if your payment is less than the monthly interest accrual, your balance continues to grow. And that contributes to the amount that's forgiven, right? But generally speaking, the more you have forgiven, the bigger your savings is going to be, right? And the more you have forgiven sooner, the less you're going to pay. It just becomes logistically challenging to plan for that higher tax, right? This is part of that pickle discussion, right? You can continue to use pay as you earn, but if your loan balance is growing because the monthly payment is less than the interest, you're going to have a higher amount forgiven. It's going to happen sooner. You're going to have to be more aggressive in how you plan for that tax if you have to pay the tax, right? So save smooths that out, right? Your monthly payment is less. Your payment, if it doesn't cover the interest is gone, and you have 5 years longer to plan for the tax. In this particular case, that's highly necessary, right? So unless you already had $200,000 laying around, right? I'm probably not going to use pay as you earn over save in this case because I need all the time I can get to plan for that potential tax. So that's part of the major differences in pay as you earn and why we built the simulator, right? We need a way to objectively measure these things, and the simulator gives us a way to do that. My salary has doubled since my last recertification. I am on repay now. Okay, so repay has turned into save automatically. How do I find out what the lowest payment will be is the servicer required to tell you? So you could do the math yourself. You can put it in the simulator, right? And we'll crank out the payment for you. But I would encourage you to do the math as well, right? So on the Student Debt Center, we've got it's the Wiki Debt, it's called. And in this collection of content, there are calculations that you can see. So the way that they calculate your payment is using what's called a discretionary income, right? And to calculate your what your payment would be for SAVE, you take your adjusted gross income off of your tax return or your taxable income, subtract off 225% of the federal poverty guidelines, which you can look up off the internet, and then you're going to take 10% of that number, right? So that would be your monthly payment, right? So when you go to recertify, studentaid.gov will show you what that payment should be too, right? But they've gotten that wrong a few times as well, right? So it's a good idea to just do the math ahead of time. So when you do recertify, you know that they're actually calculating the payment that it should be based on your income. All right, Jen asks, I did a direct consolidation through Sallie Mae in 2006. Do I qualify for account adjustment? Would I need to reconsolidate? Potentially, right? So Sallie Mae is what was the predecessor to Navient, which is now Advantage, right? So we would have to check to see whether or not that is truly a private loan or if it's actually a federally held or a privately held federal family education loan. So the best way to check that is to go to studentaid.gov, download that student aid data file, and upload it into the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool. Right. Unfortunately, just telling me it's a Sallie Mae loan is not enough information for me to know whether or not you need to consolidate. I consolidated my loans with Navient into 2 loans in 2006 at a low interest rate, projected payoff to be 2037, so 13 years from now. I've heard that forgiveness is based on income being less than a certain amount. Am I qualified candidate forgiveness or not? Your forgiveness, whether or not you reach forgiveness, is based on what your payments would be under a forgiveness eligible plan. And forgiveness eligible plans are income driven plans. So your income will determine what that monthly payment would be, right? So if you have a very high payment or a very high income, it can result in a very high monthly student loan payment. Right? But there are certain plans like ICR that will, that payment can only get so high. Right. So it could be, depending on what your remaining balance is, that you could find a sweet spot between using a plan like ICR to satisfy the remaining, let's say, 7 years you have to reach forgiveness, which could knock off another, 10 years from your projected remaining costs. Right. So that's kind of, we're doing essentially cost benefit analysis, right, all day long, right? Is it better for you to pay maybe the same, something lower, or maybe even something a little bit higher for a shorter period of time until you reach forgiveness versus paying the same amount you've been paying for a longer period of time, right? So, some of those are pretty straightforward. Some of them get really complicated, which is why we want to do those on the message board so we have more time and flexibility to dive in and really, look at your numbers more specifically. Let's see, Rachel asks, I have at least 13 payments that were approved under temporary public service loan forgiveness, which have now disappeared from my Mohila account. They say, unless I can provide proof that I had them, there's nothing they can do about the lost payments. Unfortunately, I did not print out any proof previously. Ooh, that's a good one. Oh, 13 payments. So is there, if you obtain, and this is, it kind of turns out that this is a backdoor benefit of uploading these files into the My Student Loans tool, right? If you have some older federal student aid files, it'll have this in it, right? That won't disappear from there, right? Because those files are static from the time that you grab that that data in there is static from the time that you grabbed it. Right? So if you have a collection of those files, right, that would be very valuable in terms of, you know, recouping something like this. I would also reach out to the Federal Student Loan Ombudsman. Maybe they can retrieve that information from Fed Loan Servicing, which used to be the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Monitor before MOHELA. But MOHELA is horrible, unfortunately. And they have been making goofs like this a lot. So you really do kind of have to keep some documentation handy as best you can, just in case something like that does happen, where they, you know, are, you know, dog ate my homework kind of stuff, which MOHELA is just, you know, notorious for, unfortunately. If you have consolidated direct student loans, do you have to be in an income-driven plan to qualify for forgiveness count adjustment? No, that's a good question. So you don't have to be in an income-driven plan to get the count adjustment. You just have to have the right loan types. But after, and a direct consolidation loan is the right loan type, right? So you will receive the maximum forgiveness count adjustment. But after the count is applied, then you would need to continue using a forgiveness eligible payment if you want to keep earning forgiveness credit. Yeah, that's going to be, you know, and the reason why we're going to have to keep doing these even after the forgiveness count and once the count is applied and checking in to make sure everybody got a count that seems reasonable, but then also making sure that everybody's on a path to reach forgiveness if they want to be, right? And that's going to be the next level of significant confusion, right? Because again, we've been living in this fantasy land at least the last several years, where now any repayment plan counts towards forgiveness, and that's going to go away, right? Once the count adjustment is applied, the regular rules are going to apply again, where you have to be using a forgiveness qualifying plan in order to continue earning forgiveness credit, right? So that's going to take a lot of education and, just kind of repeat messaging to make sure that everybody's, in the right and appropriate repayment plans. All right, let's see. Ashley is asking, I have the direct loans, HPSL, and LDS loans. I was trying to find out about consolidation, but it would not let me go through. Does it automatically go on the direct loans, even if not consolidated? So I think, Ashley, what you're experiencing is the fact that when you start a consolidation loan via studentaid.gov, they're going to pull in all of the loans it finds in that system, in the studentaid.gov system. And unfortunately, health profession student loans and loans for disadvantaged students do not live in that system. They're separate. So you're going to have to manually add those loans to your consolidation application. But you can do that. You can add health profession student loans and you can add loans for disadvantaged students manually to your consolidation loan, right? So add those to that consolidation and they can still be consolidated and counted in your income-driven plan. Ooh, here we go. Danielle is asking, I need help that no one else has been able to answer. I started paying off undergrad student loans beginning in 2001, but continued to accrue new grad and vet school loans through 2009. All loans are direct loans and were consolidated 10 years ago. I have been paying on an income-driven repayment plan. Do my payments end in 2 more years since I've either paid or been in deferment for 23 years? Or do I still have 10 years left since I stopped borrowing 15 years ago? Danielle, that's going to be one where we're going to have to see your, your student aid data file. So when you say you started paying off undergrad student loans beginning in 2001, I don't know if that means you were still in school in 2001 or if you graduated from that program in 2001. Again, that kind of comes back to something we were talking about earlier, where, just because you may have made payments during school doesn't mean that they necessarily count towards repayment, right? So we're going to need to look at those loans and see when those loans were in repayment, and then loans that would have been in repayment get put back into an in-school deferment when you start borrowing again, maybe for something like vet school, right? So that would have paused it. So I suspect you probably have a little bit more time than you're thinking left until you reach forgiveness, but it still might make sense for you to consolidate all those loans if they're not fully consolidated already, so you can get the maximum count adjustment. So I would I would, really encourage you to upload your student aid data file into the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool and post something on the student debt message board so we can take a deeper dive into those. Anonymous asks, what is your advice if I am planning on starting a practice in the near future and income will go up eventually? Should I assume income potential as an owner would equal 10 to 12% gross sales and track it out per year and enter into the repayment option? So I think you're maybe fast forwarding too far into the future. I think it's awesome that you're thinking about that, and congrats on thinking about starting your own practice. However, focus on the short term, right? First, make sure that you're meeting all of the deadlines that are in front of you, right? Is there any reason for you to consolidate your loans before this deadline to receive a maximum count adjustment? What plans are your loans currently eligible for? Which income-driven plan profile do you fall into, right? What's your current minimum monthly payment? As you suspect, right, if starting a practice, maybe your income will go up eventually, right? Maybe for those first couple of years, your income is actually going to be very much lower than it may currently be, right? Which means those income-driven plans will very much help you as you're getting your practice up and running, right? And maybe you want to look at a plan like Save, so the Department of Education covers your interest while those payments are very low. Now, when you're a practice owner, it's really in terms of how that interacts with your income-driven plan payment strategies, it really depends on how you pay yourself, right? So if you pay yourself some W-2 wages, you take dividends and distributions, the frequency that you receive those dividends and distributions will play a role in how you document your income for an income-driven repayment plan. But there are a lot of practice owners that can actually kind of control what they pay towards their student loans based on how they pay themselves as a practice owner, right? So when you get to that point, let's have that conversation on the message boards. But it sounds like we're probably a few years away from that, right? So before you get to that bridge, let's back up and tackle the ones that are in front of you, which are kind of, those deadlines we talked about, making sure you're in the most beneficial repayment plan while you're getting that practice started before we talk about how to best approach your student loans when you're a successful practice owner. All right. I'm a 2015 grad. This is another anonymous person posted this. I am a 2015 grad, so I've been paying for nearly 10 years. All of my loans are direct loans amounting to $342,000. The interest rates are between 5 and 7%. So what is the best way to pay off my loans without getting slammed with a massive tax bill when my loans are forgiven? All right. So the best way to pay off your loans is, and again, I'm just assuming here because you didn't actually provide any income information in that particular assessment. But just generally speaking, if I'm using some ballpark averages of what veterinarians earn out there, if you have a $342,000 student loan balance, you can't afford not to use an income-driven plan, right? So I'd really, really encourage you to take a second look, do a physical exam of your student loans. Which income-driven plans are you eligible for? Graduating in 2015, right, you probably have at least 9 years of forgiveness time logged, which means you could, depending on which plans you're able to use, reach forgiveness in another 11 years or 16 years, depending on whether or not you use pay as you earn or Save as your payment plan. But I wouldn't pick your student loan repayment strategy hoping to avoid a tax, right? If you hit the tax, you'll end up paying less than if you try to pay the balance back faster, right? That's just the way the plans work, right? So a better strategy would be to figure out which one of your income-driven plans is the most beneficial for you, pay the least amount that the rules require you to pay, and plan for that potential tax, recognizing that you have a good chunk of time yet to do that, right? That's a lot easier financially to do that than it will be to try to extinguish that $342,000 of student debt sooner than your income might allow. So that's the tack that I would take, right? So, and I've actually got I'm going to jump over to, I usually share my student loan case, but in this case, I'm going to just share my forgiveness plan, right? So this, my wife and I kind of in the double debt category, right? So we're both veterinarians. We both have a lot of student debt, more than $400,000 of student debt. This is why I'm so passionate about this, right? And I have a vested interest in understanding how this stuff works, right? So, but we're anticipating hitting forgiveness, right? And we're planning for a tax, right? That we're probably going to have to pay roughly 13 years from now, right? So we pay the least amount our income requires us to pay using save in our case, right? Because that's the best available plan for both of us. But we also have a forgiveness savings plan, right? This dotted line represents how much we've contributed to it. The solid line represents the difference between what we contributed and the value of that fund, right? The bigger this difference is, right, the less of our money is actually going to be used to pay the tax if we have to pay the tax in the future, right? So we can use the forgiveness plan long term to reduce our total repayment costs and pay less overall towards our student loans, right? So this is how this can look. And I saw somebody else mention, I don't know if it was in the Q&A or in the webinar chat, somebody mentioned Wealthfront, right? This is using Wealthfront, right? So Wealthfront's a robo-advisor. Not only does it have really good high yield savings accounts, as somebody was pointing out in there, but it also allows you to invest in a diversified portfolio relatively easily using low cost index funds. So this costs us nothing to do, right? And it's just going to keep growing until if and when we need to use it to pay the tax. And that's going to, and the more this grows, the less of our actual money will be used to pay that potential tax, right? So don't fear. And the whole reason I show this is to, kind of reinforce that question the anonymous asked about 2015 grad. Don't fear the tax bill, right? Embrace the tax bill, because if your loans hit forgiveness, it's going to provide you a huge discount, right? Because we don't tax people at 100% tax rate in this country, right? The top marginal tax bracket at the federal level is 37% or something right now, right? So you're going to pay cents on the dollar of what's left if you hit forgiveness. And as long as you're disciplined enough to plan for it, it can actually cost you less in the long run. The service that I use is called Wealthfront. So WEALTHFRONT. And it's not, there are dozens of them out there. So Betterment is in that same category. Ellevest is one that caters specifically to female investors, which is kind of interesting. But they're all in a category of robo-advisors. I mean, you could even do this with Vanguard or Charles Schwab or Robinhood or whatever, right? So a lot of these platforms make this easier than it's ever been to have a diversified portfolio that you can control relatively easily, so and inexpensively. So it's available to pretty much anyone. Sure, yeah, I can zoom back out. Yep. Cool. So I answered that one. I'm kind of just going down the questions here. So Lee asked, my credit rating took a hit, dropping 15 points in an otherwise good credit portfolio. Is there something to be expected when moving a privately held student loan to a federal one? No, I think that consolidating your loans might temporarily, ding your credit, but I wouldn't worry about that too much. So that'll rebound relatively quickly. But I certainly don't. I wouldn't avoid consolidating because of that. That'll come back up relatively quickly when you start making regular monthly payments on that consolidation loan. I have a consolidation loan that is a graduated payment plan at 3%. It only says consolidation, nothing about direct. I have a group A and group B. I was wondering when forgiveness happens and if it already consolidated, should I do it again? Yeah, that sounds fishy to me, right? So again, I would suggest that you upload your student aid data file into the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool. One of the other things that you can check, let me find the person who, all right, so when you're in the My Student Loans tool, if you're not sure whether or not your loans are federally held or privately held, if you hit the loan servicer tab, right, all of the federally held loans will say Department of Ed in front of them, right? If it doesn't say Department of Ed, then it's a privately held loan. And that's the type of loans that you need to consolidate before the deadline, right? So here's an example. This one says Department of Ed. That means it's federally held, right? So I know, and people have tried, and this is a question from Gina. I hope I'm not torturing your name there, but people have tried to describe their student loans to me like this for years, and I really can't give you a 100% answer without seeing these sorts of things. That's the way that we know how to best answer those questions, right? So if you really want to confirm that, I'll grab your student aid data file, upload it into the My Student Loans tool, and ask a question on the message boards, and we'll be able to tell you if you need to consolidate those loans. But just based on your graduation year and what you described there, it certainly sounds like it's a loan that would need to be consolidated in order to benefit from the one-time count adjustment. So is there not much benefit to be received from the count adjustment if only paying on loans for about a year? It depends on your loan history, right? So, but if all of your loans were from vet school and you graduated a year ago and just started repayment, then probably not, right? But that, again, that's just too generic of a question to answer without seeing your loan details. I do see a question here from an anonymous attendee. I would really like to, or I need to hear about the Fresh Start program for loans and default, right? So that's in the studentaid.gov universe. So if you go to, if you type in Fresh Start, student aid, or student loans, that's pretty easy to find, right? So the Fresh Start program will kind of give you all of the details there. Although if your federal student loans were in default, right, you could still consider consolidating them to get them the benefit from the count adjustment. Default status will still count towards forgiveness, right? Bankruptcy status does not, right? So again, it really depends upon the actual status of those loans. And then I would also encourage you to review the Fresh Start information on the student aid portal to see if that sounds like a better idea than potentially consolidating before the April 30th deadline. Did that one. Okay. If I graduated in 2011, so Janelle asked, if I graduated in 2011 and have been paying since then, they are still federal loans. I've paid off several and have about 33,000 left. I don't know what to do. Yeah, that's a little bit too generic, right? I would really like to see your remaining loan portfolio and which repayment plan that you're currently using, and then some of the other factors that go into that. If I'm already on an IDR plan, do we need to do anything with the forgiveness count adjustment? Yeah, so that's not really the criteria that we're looking for. So if you're using an income-driven plan, that just tells me that you have some kind of loan that's eligible for an income-driven plan. But the older loans that do need to be consolidated can still also be eligible for income-driven plans, right? So again, I cannot stress this enough. You have to look at the loan types. You got to go get your student aid data file, upload it into the My Student Loans tool. That's why we built the thing, right? It's just so we can answer these questions, because that's not enough to go on, right? We really have to see the loan details, what they say. Do they have Department of Ed in the name? Which income-driven plans are you eligible for? Those are all the pieces that are required to know whether or not you need to act on the one-time forgiveness count adjustment. Yeah, a lot of these are like really, I know you guys want to know, how long you're being repayment or what your forgiveness count adjustment is, but those are not questions I can really answer on the fly here. Those are things that you're going to have to grab your student aid data file, and we're going to have to upload it into the My Student Loans tool to really see that. All right, so here's one that kind of falls into anonymous asks. I did a MPH after vet school and was in deferment after I graduated from vet school, presuming in 2013. In 2016, I started loan repayment via income-driven repayment. I'm trying to use the loan simulator. Does that mean my repayment plan is the IBR 2014 and my repayment technically started in 2016. So a lot of things there, but this again would be much more helpful with your student aid data file. But if you graduated vet school in 2013, then you're not eligible for the IBR 2014 plan. You would have to have been a new borrower after July 1st of 2014. So chances are you're not eligible for the new version of IBR. Now, since you started borrowing again after veterinary school, you could be a really good candidate to consolidate all of your loans together to make sure you're getting the maximum count adjustment. Right, so that's a good reason to upload your student aid data file, post to the student debt message board, and let's see if we can take a deeper look into that and answer that question for you. Oh, let's see here. Okay, good conceptual question here, just on how the income-driven plans work from an anonymous attendee. I'm in a fortunate enough scenario where my income has significantly increased this year, 240,000. However, I am going to take a lower paying job at 160,000 next year because they were moving for my husband's job. I have about $209,000 of student debt, and I have been in an income-driven plan since 2014. I would love to know if it would be advisable to just pay it off ASAP or if it makes sense to invest that money. So great conceptual question. If your income is going to decrease, right, don't pay your loans back as fast as possible, right? Let that scenario play out. That's quite a bit of uncertainty there, right? I mean, you're gonna, and you guys will be fine. I mean, that's still a lot of money as a household income, but it's gonna be an adjustment, and you're gonna want to weather and navigate that change in your income. And that's what the income-driven plans are built for, right? So if you're going to experience a decrease in your income, submit to have your payment adjusted downward when your income decreases, see what that new strategy looks like for you, and then get acquainted in that new living situation. Make sure you're still working on all of those other more important areas of your financial wellness, and then reconsider your student loan repayment strategy. There's really not a lot for you to gain by cashing out your forgiveness plan and paying it towards your student loans when you're going to experience a decrease in your income, right? I wouldn't do that, right? You certainly can choose to. It's your money. You can do whatever you want with it, but I personally would not do that, right? So I would give yourself a little bit of time before you make that kind of switch. Right. So here's a good tag team question, both Rachel and Janelle. Assuming you have direct loans, is there any downside to consolidating? No, well, it depends. So yes, actually there can be, right? If you don't need to consolidate and you have some unpaid interest, right? Like we're looking at here in this particular example, this person has $67,000 of unpaid interest. When you consolidate, they will capitalize that unpaid interest. Right, which means they'll add it to your principal. The higher principal, the higher interest accrues. Generally, the more you're going to pay. Right? If you don't have a reason to consolidate, then it doesn't make sense for you to consolidate, particularly if you have unpaid interest. Right? You want to avoid that unpaid interest capitalization when you can. Now, if you can benefit from the count adjustment, you got to consolidate and take the unpaid interest capitalization hit. Right, but that question by itself is too generic to answer without seeing the details of your student loans. And Janelle asked too, as part of that same question, I hate watching interest grow. It seems like I'm banking on all of this to still be relevant in 15 years, no matter who is in charge. Yeah, I totally get that, and that's where maybe you would be a perfect candidate for the SAVE plan, right? Because the SAVE plan stops your interest from growing. Your balance will no longer grow. That's one of the really appealing reasons to use SAVE, right? It caps your balance at whatever the current balance is right now, right? You will no longer grow, period, right? And to the comment about who's in charge in the future, the student loan repayment rules are written into law, at least conceptually how the income-driven plans are. Right? How, the fact that we have plans that allow you to pay based on your income that involve a forgiveness after a certain period of time is law, right? That part can't change, right? What the actual details of how they calculate the payments and those sorts of things do change from time to time, right? We've seen, pay as you earn added. We've seen repay added, repay change to save. Now we're going to see pay as you earn go away. We've seen the new version of IBR added, right? So we do see changes to the system, right? But overall, conceptually, it doesn't change. The same concepts are there. You pay based on your income for a specified period of time. If there's a balance remaining at the end, it's forgiven, right? Whether or not it's taxable, again, will depend on, if they are treating student loan forgiveness as taxable income, which we've seen seems to be subject to, exemption. So they can change some of how it works, but overall, the same concepts still apply. All right. Whew, man. All right. I may have to, my goal tonight was to try to keep this under 3 hours. I'm gonna look at
It's good to have.
judiciously at some of these. Rebecca, if you see any, that jump out to you, feel free to jump in here and point them out. I just started going down the list, but let's see. Can I move? I think we covered that one. If I switch to a non-IBR plan because my IBR monthly payments are too high, do I restart that clock? Yes. Well, if you consolidate, you do, right? So when you consolidate your loans, it's treated like a new loan, right? So if you have a let's say $30,000 balance remaining because you graduated in 2003, and you consolidate that balance again, and you put it into a quote standard plan. That standard plan is going to be 20 or 25 years long, starting from when you consolidate. Right now, again, that's just what the minimum payment is, right? You don't have to keep paying it for another 25 or 30 years if you don't want to. You could go back to paying whatever you were paying before you consolidated, and it'll pay the balance to zero in the same time frame you were on previously, right? But if you want to hit forgiveness, then you're going to have to use one of the income-driven plans, right? And again, it is very rare that we're not able to find some combination of available plans that can work to help you hit forgiveness. Right. So we can help you do that cost benefit analysis. Oh, I see an epiphany here. So I think I finally understand my current standard plan will have a one-time count adjustment if I consolidated by April, but continue to work towards forgiveness at 25 years of payments. I need to change my plan to a qualifying income-based plan to keep gaining forgiveness monthly counts. I think so. I think you're understanding that correctly. So, it's just a matter of, so if you consolidate them by April, yes, that's great. And if you graduated in 2004, I imagine you have 20 years of forgiveness time at least, which means you would have another 5 years until you hit forgiveness. But if you're on a 25-year plan now, you're probably close to paying your loans to zero in 5 years anyway. Right? So that's where we have to look and see, is that going to work out for you? But I would still rather have the forgiveness time available to me than not, right? Just in case something changes. Maybe I'm going to retire, or maybe something happens and I can't work next year for the next 2 years, right? And I can use an income-driven plan. You can have payments under an income-driven plan that are zero, right? That still count towards forgiveness, right? So having that forgiveness time, even if it doesn't seem like you might not need it, it's better to have it in case you do need it, right? So I would still not pass up this opportunity to get that forgiveness count, even if it seems unlikely that you would hit forgiveness. I graduated undergrad in 2000, vet school in 2013, and had several years of no payments due to forbearance or hardship. Does the count still go back to 2000? It could. Right. So Dina, you sound like one of those people that should be running to at least look at your student loans to see if you need to consolidate them. Right now, you won't get time if you graduated vet school in 2013, your loans were all in that in-school status between 2009 and 2013. So that would be 4 years that wouldn't count. But if you graduated undergrad, had 9 years of payments on those undergrad loans before you started vet school, and now it's been 11 years since you graduated, you'll have 20 years of forgiveness time if you consolidate those all together, which means you're 5 years away from receiving forgiveness, right? That's, would have to refine that, but that's basically what you're looking at. So it sounds to me like you're a really good candidate to consolidate those loans. Oh, so L. Ekman here says I have a 30-year plan. Okay, so great. I mean, if your current trajectory is to pay your loans back in 10 years, and if you consolidate and get 20 years of forgiveness time and can have them forgiveness in 5 years, there's a good chance that that will turn out better cost-wise than paying on your loans for another 10 years, right? So if that's what you mean when you said you finally understand, then you're on the right track. Absolutely. Right. So that's what we're kind of looking for.
Tony, I've got a question here. It says, if I had been knocked off my IDR plan due to overpayment early on, will those months that I had not paid, loan servicer had postponed due date for overpayment, affect my overall forgiveness date? Is that a reason to consolidate?
You may not need to. That's a great question. You may not need to consolidate for that. That time should theoretically still be counted under the forgiveness count, provided that your loans are all ready, consolidated, or eligible to receive the maximum forgiveness count. You should still receive forgiveness credit for that paid ahead time. But that's also a really good learning lesson for anybody else who is paying extra towards their loans on an income-driven plan. That's not a good idea. Right. And for the exact reason that this person just explained, you can end up with all these bizarro permutations on your income driven plans that could end up having you not qualify for forgiveness as soon as you otherwise would. So again, I get the impulse to want to get rid of your debt, but your student loans behave differently than any other loan type you will ever have. Right. So it doesn't always make sense to pay extra. And particularly when you're using an income-driven plan, it can get really complicated and make things even messier when you try to pay extra. Right. So I would, there's a reason they calculate the payments that they calculate. Right. If you think that's too low, then that means that you've got disposable income. Direct that disposable income to some more useful areas of your financial wellness. Right. Your student loans are not, accelerating your payment on your student loans is really not going to help all that much, right? But paying extra to your retirement account or to buy a home, to start a practice, to, invest in something else, those are all things that are going to pay back multiples more than just paying extra towards your student loans, particularly on an income-driven plan. So that's a great question. Thanks for bringing that one out.
Yeah.
Sorry, I love this one. Can I return my degree, get a refund on my student loans, and go into a different field that doesn't require a degree? Seems less stressful. Yeah, sometimes it can. I mean, you could have done that while you were in school, but yeah, unfortunately now you kind of, you break it, you bought it, right? So, yeah, you could choose to, you could choose to pay attention, which I imagine that, especially if you guys are still here now, you have a vested interest in this, but there's quite a bit of flexibility on the table if you're willing to go down the rabbit hole here.
We've got a couple of questions about married borrowers and should they file taxes jointly or separately with their spouse?
Yeah, so that one I'm going to defer you to the student debt message boards, but you also, the way to work through that, so I'm going to come back to our example simulation here. So when you get to the family information section, right, you're going to add in that status, right? And whatever your spouse's income is and whatever you think their income is going to do in the future, whether or not they have student loans, if you have dependents, all of that will play a role here. But everybody that's married has to run at least 2 simulations, right? You're going to run one as married filing jointly. You're going to run a second as married filing separately. And what the simulator will show you is the difference in student loan repayment costs between filing jointly and filing separately, right? But then you're going to have to go visit with a tax professional to see what it's going to cost you in taxes and benefits if you file separately versus filing jointly, right? And whichever combination allows you to keep the maximum resources in your household budget is the combination you should choose, right? I could give you some general guidelines, Generally speaking, if, you're the veterinarian and your spouse doesn't have any student loans and they earn, less than you, then you're probably going to benefit from filing separately. Right? If you're in the double vet category, like my wife and I are, you're generally going to benefit from filing jointly because you both have student loans. And that is factored into your equation together. Right? It's usually more beneficial to take the tax benefits than to file separately, lose the tax benefits and pay more in taxes just to save just a little bit on your student loans when you both have student loans. But when only one of you has student loans, it usually does make sense to file separately. Then there's also if you do file separately, do you live in a community property state, right? So some of the biggest, most populated states, Texas, California, are community property states. Right? So when you file your taxes separately in a community property state, it looks a little bit differently, right? Which means that you have an additional piece of information that you can use that might be more beneficial for applying for an income-driven plan. Right? So it gets really complicated, which is again why we have the student debt message board area. You can also share these simulations. Right? So if you run a couple of different simulations or you run a simulation and you want to get some feedback on it, you can hit the save share button, copy that, paste it in your message board discussion, and then we've got something that we can look at together. Yeah, so Ashley, does a community property state split both incomes by half? So generally speaking, yes. Right? So you kind of pool your incomes together. When you file your tax return, on your tax return, you're going to get half of the household income, your spouse is going to get half, depending on how your incomes are different, right? Your tax return adjusted gross income could be a much lower number than your actual veterinary income, but that would still work for an income-driven plan payment. You can use that tax return income. They take that all the time. So it's like the gold standard for documenting your income in an income-driven plan. So again, kind of like taxes, they get really complicated and there's a lot of weird permutations that help you pay less in taxes than you might otherwise know about if you didn't visit with a tax professional. Same thing happens with your student loans, right? There's a lot of weird little loopholes and rules that allow you to pay less towards your student loans than you might expect to pay just based on how you file your taxes. Ashley asks, can I post in the message boards without having an active VIN membership? I can't seem to find the right place to post. I uploaded my student aid file just fine. Yeah, so you can, right? But we need you to have a username and password.
Yeah, Ashley, if you don't remember your username and password, let us know. I should have just fixed that so you can now see that link that Tony's pointing out now if you are logged in.
Cool. Great. Yeah, thank you. So you might need to refresh that, but yeah, if you have a username and password from VIN and an active VIN membership, that will definitely work. But if you're no longer a VIN member and you still have a VIN username and password, we can still get you access to the VIN Foundation Student Debt Message Board area, right? But we just have to, like Rebecca described, we have to kind of activate that through VIN Foundation, right? So, and we have a VIN Foundation application too that we can have you apply if you were never a VIN member prior. You can apply through VIN Foundation as well. This is a good follow-up question. Kira asked, could you please repeat that SAVE does not acquire interest compared to pay? No, that's correct. So it doesn't accrue interest. So you have a minimum monthly payment that's based on your income for a plan like pay or save. Oftentimes, that minimum monthly payment is less than the monthly interest accrual. Pay as you earn will just add that unpaid interest to your unpaid interest balance, right? Which is part of your total balance that you owe. Save comes with 100% unpaid interest subsidy, which means if your payment is less than the monthly interest accrual, the Department of Education actually covers all of that interest that your payment does not cover. That's a unique difference from Save to any of the other plans, right? So pay doesn't cover your interest if you're not covering it through your monthly payment. Save does. All Right, Jessica asks, I'm a little confused. So if we graduate just a little, so if we graduate in 2006 and have an IBR plan, which is 20 years, if you graduate in 2006, you can't have an IBR plan that's 20 years, right? So if you graduate in 2006, you're on a 25-year income-driven timeline, right? And it won't start over, right? So if you have loans that you can consolidate that will benefit from the count adjustment, and you graduate in 2006, that was 18 years ago, right? So I would expect you to receive potentially around 18 years of forgiveness credit, right? Which would leave you 7 years away from reaching forgiveness under a plan like IBR or SAVE. Right, so it does take that prior time into consideration. Right now, when we start talking about plans like pay as you earn that have a 20-year forgiveness timeline, that's for more recent graduates that are eligible for pay as you earn. Right, that's where that income-driven plan eligibility tab comes into play. Right, not everybody is eligible for pay as you earn. Right, pay as you earn and the people that are eligible for the new version of IBR have a 20-year forgiveness option available to them, but everybody else has a 25-year. Hopefully that is a little less confusing. Any recommendations on personal consultations for student loan repayment? Yeah, that's what the message boards are for, right? I mean, those are personal consultations, right? They're, again, let me find that. Where's my example? I mean, there literally are thousands of these in here, right? These are all personal consultations, right? So if you're happy to post in there, we're happy to provide some feedback on your student loan questions. Let's see. Tony mentioned that going into residency, so Jennifer asked this, you mentioned going into residency, you don't want to do a forbearance. Does this apply to hardships? I know you can do a forbearance, but yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thanks for asking that. So literally forbearance and deferment are obsolete. There is no reason to use a forbearance and deferment option after you get out of school. Right now, while you're in school, your loans are automatically deferred, and there's not much you can do about that. However, after you're out of school, if your income should decrease for any reason, use an income-driven plan. Right? The same kind of things that trigger, economic hardship deferments are related to your income being too low to make payments. Right? If you have a very low income for any reason, you can apply to have your payment calculated to reflect that income using an income-driven plan. Right? So if you don't have any income because you're on medical leave or whatever, your payment can be zero. Right? And if you're using a plan like SAVE, the Department of Education covers all of your interest. Right? So it's like a deferment, but better because you still are counting towards forgiveness as well. Right? And the Department of Education is covering your interest. If you defer or forbear your loans and they're unsubsidized, which are most of your loans, you're going to still accrue interest. Right? If you use SAVE and you have a $0 monthly payment or even a very low monthly payment, the Department of Education is covering all your interest. Right? So and your loan servicers love to offer you forbearance and deferment because it's really easy for them. Right? But apply to have your payment recalculated. Right? So that's in the studentaid.gov universe. Right? Income-driven repayment plan. You can submit updates to your income if your income decreases, and they'll decrease your payment. All right, I think we do have to. I thank you, Gregory. People are kind of checking out here, and I appreciate that, and I really do want to try to keep this under the 3-hour time frame. We will definitely try to answer some of these other questions that we did not get to tonight, but I also would encourage you guys to hopefully post over on the message boards. And if you've uploaded your student aid data file, we could take a quick peek at that and try to get you some feedback before that April 30th deadline to tell you whether or not you need to consolidate. right? So that's what we're going to be really focused on in the short term here, trying to make sure that we get to those people. So we'll probably prioritize a lot of those message board replies ahead of some of the other ones, because again, just by nature of the deadlines, we want to make sure that we don't miss any opportunities for anybody that can consolidate and receive these maximum count adjustment, because it really is just superbly beneficial. So we'll focus on those, and then we'll kind of keep working towards the next deadlines, right? We'll start talking about the pickle next before pay as you earn and ICR go away, and that'll overlap with when the count adjustments are applied. And I think a lot of the confusion, a lot of the questions I was kind of getting from you guys tonight will hopefully be a little bit cleared up once we see those count adjustments, right? When you see a number and then we know how much longer you have until you hit forgiveness, I think a lot of this is going to make much more sense. So thanks again for everybody who stuck it out and asked a lot of outstanding questions. Thank you, Rebecca, for moderating and making sure we got to a lot of those good concepts and questions as well. And again, we'll keep doing these things too. So look out for those emails, and we'll keep doing sessions like this until everybody has a better understanding of their student loans.
Yeah, absolutely. Tony, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We've got over 140 questions that we've already answered, and I'm pretty sure it's more than that. So thank you. Thank you, Jordan, for helping out in the background as well. We'll be sending the recording, Tony's Prezi with all the links and everything out in an email in the next couple of days. Give us a couple of days just to make sure we can get this all squared away for you, and then we'll get it sent your way. If you're having trouble accessing the VIN Foundation student debt message boards for any reason, shoot us an email at studentdebt@vinfoundation.org, and we'll help sort you out. It might be that, you need to do that VIN Foundation application and create a login, or it might be something we need to do on our end. So just reach out and let us know if that's something you're having an issue with.
Very cool. Yeah, great reminder. Thank you for that. And everybody have a great night, and we'll catch you on the boards or again at the next webinar.